Good morning. Magandang umaga in Filipino words. Magandang umaga, mabuhay. Wherever you are, online participants, welcome. It is a great pleasure to welcome you here to Research to Policy Dialogue on Plastic Pollution and Antimicrobial Resistance.
Hello, on my part, good morning. People who came here, our guests, welcome, and who join us online, welcome to the Research to Policy Dialogue about plastic pollution, climate change, and antimicrobial resistance. We are very happy to be here with you and discuss scientific questions and actions questions, and we will be welcoming all your inputs and comments. Thank you so much for coming.
Of course, today we are gathered together both in person and virtually, bringing together a diverse and distinguished group of researchers, policymakers, leaders, and advocates from around the world. To our in-person attendees, it's wonderful to see many familiar faces and new participants joining us here today. To our online participants, thank you for joining us from various locations around the world. Your presence, both in person and virtually, signifies the importance of this dialogue and the commitment we all share in addressing these pressing global challenges.
That's very true. The global scale of all this phenomena also makes it a very international and global concern. Therefore, this is a big answer to a question, why don't we speak in German here, but speak English? So, apologize, please wear your English ears, and we will continue speaking English. We also are happy to welcome our international partners from the Philippines and from Italy and all over the globe.
Exactly. Yeah. So for the Filipino delegates, we have here our esteemed Director 4 of the Research Institute for Tropical Medicine, the research arm of the Department of Health in the Philippines. Welcome.
And also, this is the gathering not only for the scientific and policy dialogue. Of course, we have our colleagues, and we here working on the plastic pollution, antimicrobial resistance, and climate change phenomena within a very big European project together with our Filipinos partners called Tulip, where we try to address these questions and try to find solutions. Therefore, we will be welcoming all your input and suggestions because we are just in the beginning of this project.
Yes, and at the same time, perhaps majority of you are asking, why the Philippines? The Philippines is among the world's most afflicted settings in terms of accumulation of global and local plastic waste. Because of course, because of its geography, and it's composed of more than 7,000 islands. Also, this increases the burden of antimicrobial resistance in humans and animals, animal sectors, and vulnerability to climate change due to its exposure to hydrological hazards.
And it's very important to consider it's not the Philippines are very much affected, the population of the Philippines, the ecosystem, the animals of the Philippines affected, but it is a global problem. We might be the biggest source of the plastic pollution, but the Filipinos communities might be suffering the most from that. So we need to bring together the communities of Europe and our Southeast Asia friends and colleagues, as well as all people around the globe.
Exactly. Okay, so to officially open this event and to welcome us, I am thrilled to present the Vice Rector for International Affairs and Diversity. He is the Director of the Institute for Comparative Law, Conflict of Laws, and International Business Law here at Heidelberg University. As a Vice Rector, he is responsible for the international partnership of Heidelberg University, in particular, the 4EU plus European University Alliance, as well as Heidelberg University that caters abroad. It's my pleasure to introduce Professor Dr. Mark Philip Veller. Warm of applause.
Yes, thank you very much for this very, very kind introduction. I'm not used to have such a kind introduction. A very warm welcome from my side. As you have heard, I'm a lawyer. I'm from the law faculty. My name is Mark Weller, and I'm the Vice Rector for International Affairs. So, dear Mrs. Duran from the Philippines, from the Health Department, dear Joachim Röcklöf, dear Marina Treskova, thank you very much for organizing this wonderful event here in the old lecture hall of Heidelberg University. You are the oldest university of Germany, founded 1386. 1386, more than 600 years old. And we are happy to have these old lecture halls for such conferences as you have here today. For ceremonies, it is used sometimes for prize ceremonies, for example. And I'm impressed that you built up here some chairs of plastic, very interesting, very inspiring, and you touch to this old lecture hall. Plastic pollution, climate change, and antimicrobial resistance. Well, as you have heard, I'm working on international conflict of laws and international litigation. And what is a big trend in this aspect is the so-called climate change litigation. Climate change litigation against states to force the states to enact stricter regulation on climate protection, but also against companies to reduce CO2 emission, mitigation claims, CO2 reduction claims. So we have an important amount of such claims worldwide raised by NGOs, for example in Germany, against the automotive industry, against Volkswagen, Mercedes-Benz, BMW, but also in other parts of the world. And from this climate change litigation, the argumentation is with the Paris Agreement, with international law, public international law, which is tried to transpose to companies, to oblige companies to stick to the Paris Agreement and to stick to the human rights. And what is interesting now is that there is a parallel to the so-called microplastic litigation, which is beginning now in the US. Not in Germany, not in Europe, but in the US, we have the first claims also against companies to reduce microplastic in the production process. So here I can see an interesting parallel between law and your specialty, global health and life sciences. Well, you are here in this old lecture hall. Heidelberg is a comprehensive university. It was founded 1386 as a comprehensive university, and I take the advantage to show you here the ceiling of this old lecture hall. If you look ahead, you can see the four paintings, the circles, the round paintings, and imagine which were the four founding faculties in 1386. If you look here, what do you think? What was the most important faculty at the time, 1386? Theology, exactly, theology. And the second faculty was the law faculty. Then we have the third one, perhaps you might see. Yeah, it's medicine, indeed. And the fourth is a little bit more complicated. It's philosophy in the broad sense, including, for example, mathematics and today what we call the natural sciences. So, and if you look behind me, this painting, you can see that's a scenery of Heidelberg. You can see it at a castle, especially for the international guests. You should take your time to go up to the castle because you have a beautiful view. And you can see here in the middle the goddess Minerva, or Pallas Athene in the Greek mythology, which is the goddess of wisdom, followed by the professors entering Heidelberg. So that's the scenery of 1386. And another feature I would like to show you here in this old lecture hall is the architectural structure of this old lecture hall. You can see here a cathedral, we say in German. On the opposite, you have another one on the other side, above on the balcony. And you have two balconies left and right here. And this opposition is coming from the philosophy of Hegel, Gottfried Wilhelm Hegel, who used also to be in Heidelberg for several years. And Hegel said that you have scientific progress if you formulate first a thesis, then you formulate an antithesis, and the progress results from the discussion of thesis and antithesis and the formulation of a synthesis. And the synthesis is made indeed here by the audience, by the students at the time, by the professors, by the colleagues. So with this introduction, I wish you good discussions on this very important topic. I wish you a good time in Heidelberg and here at Heidelberg University. Very warm welcome again. Thank you.
Thank you so much again. Yeah, I hope I'm audible. No. Okay, now I'm working. So I would like to, it's my pleasure to introduce the video appeal. Our colleague, Philip Landiger, was not able to make it in person here, but he's one of the leading researchers working on plastic pollution and human health, as well as how do we connect ocean health to human health. And he prepared a short 5-minute statement and brief. I would like to invite you to listen and try to understand the scale of the problem. Thank you.
Good morning. I am delighted to be with you today and sorry that I can't be there in person. I'd like to speak to you as a medical doctor who has spent the past several years studying the connection between plastics and human health, and to tell you that there is urgent need for action in this space. So you're all familiar with plastics in the ocean, plastics on beaches, plastics in cities. This is well known. But what has become increasingly clear in recent years is that plastics also harm human health. And 2 years ago, we formed the Minderoo Monaco Commission on Plastics and Human Health with the goal of examining plastics health hazards across the whole life cycle, starting with feedstock extraction, transport, manufacture, use, recycling, disposal, and then finally we looked at the health consequences of carbons, of plastics' very large carbon footprint, which is amounts to about 2 gigatons of greenhouse gas emissions per year, more than that of Brazil. And we found hazards at every stage. In fracking and oil drilling, there are occupational hazards and hazards to the nearby community. Many carcinogenic gases such as benzene and formaldehyde spill from fracking sites into air and water. There are hazards in transportation. This is a picture from East Palestine, Ohio, where last year a rail car containing vinyl chloride monomer, plastic chemical tipped over, forced the evacuation of a whole town. There are hazards in plastic manufacturing facilities. There are occupational hazards to the workers. There are spillover hazards into the nearby communities. Here's a picture of a so-called fence line community beside a plastic manufacturing plant in southern Louisiana, USA. These communities are almost always poor, minority, marginalized communities. Plastic contains more than 16,000 chemicals which are added to the polymer matrix. These chemicals add particular properties to the plastic, like flexibility, ultraviolet resistance, antioxidation. Many of them are toxic, neurotoxicants, carcinogens, and endocrine disruptors, and many more have never even been tested for toxicity. And these chemicals do not stay in the plastic. They leach out, they get into the environment, they get into people. They are responsible for many of plastic's harms. I'm a pediatrician, and I speak always about the particular hazards of plastics and plastic chemicals to the health of young children. If exposure takes place during pregnancy, during early childhood, the consequences can be brain damage, birth defects, cancer, endocrine disruption. These effects can be permanent, and there are no safe thresholds for exposure. They can last lifelong. There are also microplastics that result when plastic breaks down in the environment. These can cause toxicity by mass action, by their sheer physical presence, but also they serve as vectors for toxic chemicals and also for pathogenic bacteria. A recent report in the New England Journal of Medicine looking at the cardiovascular hazards of microplastics detected microplastics in carotid artery plaque of 58% of 312 patients who were examined, and patients who had micro and nanoplastics in their plaques had a 4.5-fold increase in risk of death or myocardial infarction or stroke over the succeeding 3 years. This is only one study. It certainly does not prove cause and effect, but the findings are very worrisome, and the relative risk of 4.5 is very strong. The main driver of the plastic crisis is relentless increase in plastic production. It has increased more than 200-fold since the 1950s. It's on track to double by 2040 and triple by 2060. And the biggest component of that is single-use plastic. Less than 10% is recycled. Plastic has huge economic costs that are associated with plastic production and with plastic chemicals. The Minero-Monaco Commission estimated that these amount to about 1.26 trillion US dollars per year, and that's a very conservative underestimate. So the time has come when we must act. The Global Plastic Treaty is urgently needed. There's still much that we don't know about plastic and many questions that need to be answered, but we cannot use the absence of complete knowledge to delay action. And a key provision, therefore, of the Global Plastics Treaty has to be a global cap on plastic production. It's the only way to reduce the problem. Reduction of plastics harms by recycling is a laudable goal, but to date, an empty promise. Less than 6% of global plastic is recycled. Thank you for your attention. And remember that the problem is not just plastic waste, it's plastic production. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Landrigan, for that powerful and insightful call to action. Before we proceed to our session, the next part of our session, I would also like to introduce Dr. Max Jungmann, the Executive Manager of the Heidelberg Center for Environment here at Heidelberg University and the CEO of Momentum Novum, a strategy consultancy focused on sustainability. He will also be co-moderating the sessions. Welcome.
Thank you.
To deliver an impulse talk on the Tulip project and how it can drive change through science and action, it's a pleasure to introduce an Alexander von Humboldt professor leading the Interdisciplinary Center for Scientific Computing, or IWR, at the Heidelberg University. His research interests cover a wide range of critical areas, including epidemiology, global health, infectious diseases, One Health, climate change, modeling, and data science. Please welcome Professor Dr. Joachim Rocklov.
For us to be sharing and coordinating, leading the Tulip project, which is just addressing the issues of plastic pollution in convergence with climate change and health. And by Phil's previous talk, I think it's quite obvious that there's a lot of potential needs in terms of public health protection in this space. It's a quite sharp and to some extent bad-looking trend and trajectory in terms of emissions, and the problem is not likely to get much better. So it's really important to take research into society and to research where the needs are the greatest and try to, as efficiently as possible, bring that to users in the society, both at the local scale and at the global scale. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about the, let's see here, the global contextual situation around plastic. So first of all, plastic in human health is not new, but there's a lot of knowledge gaps in this area. There was a recent editorial in The Lancet that was covering partly the discussion that was recently taking place in Canada on the plastic treaty, which is aiming to put in policies and agreements at the global scale, 176 countries, to put caps on production and to improve recycling and reduce the amount of plastic that ends up in the environment and in the oceans. And some interesting facts to the situation is that in 1950 we produced 2 million tons of plastic. In the year 2000 we produced 200 million tons of plastic, and the production is rising sharply for many reasons. One of the reasons is this one-use type of containers of plastic, which is quite unnecessary. So there's been some policies recently to actually prevent the sale and the use of such plastic items, and that could be really effective. There's a modeling study that shows that if we have a greater uptake of policies to reduce these type of one-use containers of plastic, we could reduce the whole consumption by 30% or so. So that's really important fact. In the future, of course, there's a potential that a lot of the plastic that we produce and use is going to end up as pollution. And actually OECD published a figure saying that plastic containers ending up as pollution could increase as much as double, so from 20 million tons to 44 million tons, so a little bit more than a double in 2040. That's bad. There's a lot of good recycling going on, but still up to 5% of the plastic ends up in the ocean. And that's an alarmingly high number, especially given the rising trend in the pollution and the plastic production. So that has to be dealt with. Health could be a really key instrument to put and push policies into place. It's been proven in the climate science discussions and policy, research to policy, that the human phase of climate change is very important for policy, important for people to support policies. And I think the same situation could actually be applied to plastic. And actually, plastic and climate change is not two independent things. It's highly interconnected. So about the production, plastic production contributes, some numbers I looked up, states 3 to 4% of global CO2 emissions. Of course, it depends then on the recycling and the waste management, how much is actually the net effect. But 3 to 4% is quite high. If you compare it to global aviation transportation, it would be about 2%, maybe 2-3%. So it's a big number. It's actually a big contribution to CO2 as well. And as we're going to listen to in the next session, plastic and climate change is highly interconnected also in the transport. Floods, for example, or hydrological events could transport microplastics to new locations. So there's a number here on the slide where they measured the microplastic concentrations in the Bay of Bengal, in Ganges. And during the pre-monsoon season, it was about 1 million microplastics per day. And after the monsoon season, when much more rain, there was 3 million billion microplastic per day. So it's a huge effect. It could be hugely affected by hydrological events. And there's also other mechanisms in which climate change and microplastics and plastics sort of interact and those effects together is going to shape a different landscape which we need to address. And it's going to be really exciting to listen to the speakers a little bit later to learn more about the interconnectedness in this space. The Plastic Treaty is a UNEP-driven process with a global negotiation. I think the number is 176 countries is engaged at the moment. It faces about the same issues as the climate negotiation, and it's a little bit at the same scale. There's big lobbying and interest from certain actors, so producers, from industry, to make the negotiations and the commitment of countries weaker to some extent, because it's a lot of economic interest in plastic production. So it struggles, and we know how that has been working out in the past. It's often the case that there's strong lobbying, but still it looks promising to have the development of a treaty that would be put in place probably in the fall, in the end of this year, before the end of this year. And the objective is not to remove plastic totally, but according to Inger Andersson, who is at the UNEP director, leading a lot of these efforts, the objective is not to reduce plastic, not to be doomed by plastic in the future. When it comes to research, to society and to practice, this is a figure from the Lancet Countdown, which is actually looking at how much we tend to study and observe impacts and effects. And that's really important, because we need to describe the mechanisms, the processes, understand what's going on. But we do that to a too large degree, so we don't actually provide evidence for action to stakeholders and to users in the extent that is needed. We get a little bit stuck in understanding the nitty-gritty details as scientists. And the graphic shows here that there is much more research in the climate field, which actually now includes plastic, climate interaction, and health, on impacts rather than on adaptation and mitigation, which would be what we need to do in order to deal with a problem. So we need to move closer to action, closer to interventions, still informed by the need and the mechanisms so we could derive and develop interventions in the right way. We need to work with communities, we need to work with policymakers, it's different scales, but without actually including stakeholders across society, it's going to be very difficult to tackle this issue. And that's actually what Tulip is doing. So Tulip is working at both the fundamental science scale, studying relationship, mechanism, new insights, and at the same time connects these insights to, and the knowledge, synthesizes knowledge from the literature to societies, and tries to figure out what can we actually do that's effective in the community and at the wider scale that could help us tackle these issues. And the focus of Tulip is particularly climate change, plastic pollution, and antimicrobial resistance. A lot of, I think all of the Tulip partners are here today in this room, and it's going to be really fascinating to listen to the upcoming speakers and panel discussions. So I'll leave now the room for the next session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Rocklov. And now we are beginning the first session of our event, which will delve into the complex and intertwined challenges of microplastic pollution AMR or antimicrobial resistance and climate change, these issues, while significant on their own, intersect in ways that compound their impacts on water environments and ultimately our health and ecosystems. We have a lineup of esteemed speakers and experts who will share their insights and research findings, providing us with a comprehensive understanding of this pressing issue. Just a quick note, after each speaker, we will have a 5-minute open discussion for a question from either our in-person or virtual participants. Before asking your question, we would like you to briefly introduce yourself with your name and the institution you are affiliated with. With that said, let us begin with our first speaker, a marine biologist and a senior advisor at the Water Institute in the Netherlands, working on the topic of plastic pollution for the last 15 years. She works at the Science and Policy Interface, a strong promoter of the source-to-sea approaches to better inform decision makers and solutions. Let us all welcome Ms. Joanna Vega on her talk entitled Understanding the Plastic Pollution in Water Ecosystem and its Impact on Health.
So, good morning, everyone. I'm probably not very visible, but at least I hope you can hear me. It's a great pleasure to be here in this beautiful room, and I have the challenge to be the first speaking about one of the big issues that we are currently facing, plastic pollution. So, plastics, whether we love it or hate it, we actually cannot live without it. And in terms, from the perspective of, from a point of view of the material, is actually quite a remarkable material because it can be shaped into many forms and applications. It has enabled advancements in electronics, medicine. It's lightweight, is super resistant, is durable, and it's cheap to produce. And these are actually the characteristics that also make plastic so unwelcome if it ends up in nature. So it can be transported for long distances. It's difficult to biodegrade, we know that, and therefore it's very persistent if entering in the environment and can accumulate. And the big issue is, indeed, as already been mentioned, is the fact that a lot of these items are actually produced to be used once or for very short living. And therefore, we see all around us, especially for plastic packaging, and this sense of disposability also gives people the sense of getting rid of it very easily, and I think this is also an important aspect to it. Nowadays, we speak a lot about circular economy, and what does this mean for plastics? So, in theory, a circular economic system for plastics means that we have these continuous loops of reuse and recycle. We see on the left there's a minimum entry, so part of the material itself is actually produced by raw materials, but this is actually a minimal amount. And we see, so as the main benefit, we see that the leakage into the environment is minimal. So this is a very effective system that has, of course, many other socioeconomic benefits. But the problem is that we are very far from this picture. So this is actually the flows of plastic packaging at the global level. This is a bit of an old picture, but I don't think it has changed a lot. So we see it's pretty much linear. So we have a big part of the plastic being produced to be used very quickly. We see that the circle part of it is actually very limited, around 12%. And a big part of, and I'll try to get the pointer. So we see that once disposed, a large part of it is actually incinerated in the best case scenario, with or not some energy recovery. and then close to 40% is actually landfilled. There's another big part of it here that is actually not managed at all, or is either directly dumped into the environment, or even water, or littered and making its way to the environment. So we see that a system like this obviously is going to lead to a significant leakage into the environment. There's been different studies. There's this very commonly quoted figure of 10 million tons per year entering the marine environment. Personally, for me, I know it's a big number, but it doesn't tell me much. So to put this into perspective, this is equivalent to 1 truck of plastic being discharged into the sea every minute. We know that a lot of this plastic is actually carried into the sea by rivers. So we have here a global figure. We can see, of course, that there are some regions where the issue is more critical. And this, of course, has to do with the fact that there's also a lot of density of people, combined with the fact that there is poor waste management and a lot of plastic loads entering our societies. But I think the key message here is that there is no region that does not contribute to the problem of plastic pollution. So we find plastic everywhere, not only in rivers and lakes, but in the marine environment, floating at the surface, deposited on the seafloor, or ending up on the beaches. Even in very remote places, so the most remote places on Earth, such as the poles or the deep sea. So we have pictures here up to 11,000 meters, so in the Mariana Trench, where we still find plastic. And more recently, what we find, has already been mentioned, is that it's getting closer to us. So we find it already in food, in our drinking water, and of course, then we should not be surprised that it's already being detected inside our bodies. In human stool, human blood, breast milk, but also tissues and organs such as the placenta or the testicles. And I see, maybe I captured the male audience attention now. One interesting aspect of plastic is that, so as a pollutant, it can be found in a very broad range of sizes. So from several meters, as it's the case of large fishing nets. This is more or less the size category of the items we commonly use, down to 1,000 times smaller than a millimeter, so at the scale of a bacterium or even a viral particle. And this is actually the size where it's starting to be quite challenging to detect these particles. The larger items can lead to entanglement of marine life, such as turtles, seals, dolphins, whales, and so on. Many of these aquatic species are actually protected. It can be mixed with food, can be mistaken by food by marine animals and be ingested. So we see here the example of a bird. This was actually the picture that shocked me more or less 20 years ago, because it's just nonsense that items that we use in our daily lives end up in the stomach of albatrosses or birds that are living in very remote places. And we see also the tiny particles here that can be ingested by small organisms such as the zooplankton. Because of its capacity to be transported, there's also the issue of plastic working as a vector to transport species from one region to the other, and leading to the risk of invasive species and a big threat to biodiversity, but also tiny organisms that grow on its surface, so microorganisms and microbial community, which might include pathogens. And as mentioned, this is one of the focus of Tulip. More related to our economy, we know that in many regions of the world, there's basically no system, not even to collect the plastic that families and communities produce and generate. So, of course, these people, they need to deal with the waste somehow. And what we see is a large amount of plastic being burned openly, which releases very extremely harmful substances. And it can also affect maritime sectors such as shipping and fishing, and also coastal tourism. You probably came across already a litter on the beach, and the reason why we don't see more often this is because coastal municipalities, they spend significant amount of money cleaning the beaches to keep them attractive to their visitors. Now we know the difficulty that plastic has, I mean, is designed to be like that. So it lasts a lot, it does not degrade easily, and instead it just fragments into smaller particles, very tiny particles. The tiniest, we are named them as nanoplastics, so smaller than a micrometer. And in fact, they are all over, they are all around, and especially in indoors environments where we have the release of, for example, synthetic textiles from our shirts, curtains, carpets, couch. And of course, we are constantly breathing these particles. So in fact, it's now being quantified that the largest amount of plastics that end up in our bodies is through inhalation and not so much through ingestion. And when we ingest it, it's simply because these particles are being deposited on the food. So the physical effect of these particles are still being actively researched, is actually an emerging area of research at the moment, but there is evidence, for example, for inflammatory responses from our bodies. There is also the chemical effect, because plastic is not just a simple substance. It can be made by different polymers, which is basically the backbone of carbon that plastic is made of. But on top of that, there are a series of other chemicals that are incorporated during production to give the different properties to plastic, namely the color. And these, as mentioned by the first statement, can leach out to the surrounding environment, and that environment can actually be food. We know that some of these substances, you probably heard of bisphenol A, so that's the BPA that we now see a lot in containers not containing it. That's an example of an endocrine disruptor, but there are many others with very harmful effects. So in terms of outlook, as mentioned already, the outlook does not look good. We are expecting, of course, an increase in the population, and therefore the continuous increase in production and consumption, especially if we keep the pattern as we currently have now. So that means more plastic waste. We know that the amounts can be close to between double and triple of plastic waste ending up in our aquatic environments. And what I find also interesting is that even continuing even considering the current commitments that countries are making, we are still going to expect a huge increase in the amount of plastic that ends up in our oceans. So I think what we're doing is still not enough. It's a very complex issue in the sense that it has a responsibility from every part of society, and this makes these people tend then to blame each other and putting the blame elsewhere, being it on governments or the industry. On the other hand, the advantage is that everyone can see it. It's not as complicated to understand or to explain as, for example, climate change. And this, I think, is a big advantage, and we've been exploiting that a lot. And I think the key message is that plastic litter, so we're talking about the big stuff, not the small stuff, is preventable. It's not like traveling by plane where there will be always some emissions. This is totally preventable issue. And of course, we all have a role to play. So we need, of course, our government to protect our health and set the rules of the game through regulations and incentives, and to help drive the change that we need. Of course, we need appropriate systems to collect and ensure that the waste is channeled in appropriate pathways. And I would like to also show you something. We need also a redesign of products, because at the moment products are made not considering the end and the whole life cycle. And what I'd like to show you is just a normal toothbrush, apparently a normal toothbrush. This is something we often have to replace every 5 months or so. So all of this is made of plastic and is disposable. And this is actually a neat solution. It's a German design. And the head of the toothbrush is replaceable. Means that we can still keep on using this part. And so we need solutions like this, and this also has to start at the design and the producer's stage. And finally, of course, us as individuals, we also have a role to play through our choices when we buy stuff, when we use, and how we dispose. I see a lot of researchers here and future researchers. We need knowledge to continue to be generated, and this is also a personal opinion. I think we also need to be more vocal and not just publish, our knowledge, but making it outreach the wider society. And with this, I'd like to finish. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Joanna, for this really insightful and engaging talk. I think you really lived up to what you called for in the end, to be more vocal about it and to also look into solutions. I really appreciated that. My name is Max. I'm the executive manager of the Heidelberg Center for the Environment. Mark kindly introduced me before. I will help to facilitate the session and the panel afterwards. And as Mark already said, after each talk, we have very little time for like one question. If you have a substantive question, if there's something that you would like to understand a bit further from the previous speaker, and then we will move on to the next speaker. So if you have a question in the room, just give us a quick sign. If there's a question online, also welcome to all of the online participants. We have over 60 people joining us online already, around 50 people in the room, and there's getting more and more people are getting here, so that's a great outcome already. I don't see any questions right now in the room, but we will also have a coffee break later on where you can meet the guests and the speakers and ask further questions. Thank you so much, Joanna, for this really, really inspiring talk, and I really appreciated that you also looked into solutions. Thank you. Wonderful. And after hearing more about the issues, the challenges surrounded with plastics, we will now look more into antimicrobial resistance, and we'll be hearing from a true expert who came here from Stettin and who's also based in Potsdam and who really identifies with the project, as we can see from the T-shirt, the Tulip project, Professor Dr. Hans-Peter Crossard, who is the Professor for Aquatic Microbial Ecology and Functional Biodiversity at the University of Potsdam in Germany. And he's a microbiologist by training and focuses on microbial ecology in aquatic environments, understanding of microbial communities on plastics, and process of biofilm formation. And he will be taking us to a journey into exploring the issues surrounded by microbial resistance in water systems, and hopefully also what we can do about it. Thank you so much, and we're looking forward to the talk.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction, and it's a bit uncommon to stand here in front of you because usually I'm acting and I like to move around, but it's also nice to be here. The topic of antimicrobial resistance is actually not my main topic, and I'm an ecologist, but I want to give you a kind of ecological view on the topic and then probably also show you how it is related to the overall plastic pollution problem. And first of all, I want to thank my working group, and in particular two PhD students who started to look at the topic of microbial colonization, but also then horizontal gene transfer on microplastic. And Maria Arias, she is now a professor in Costa Rica, and she started to look at actually antibiotics microbial resistance on microplastics. And antimicrobial resistance is actually a natural phenomenon. So when bacteria interact with each other, for example, on biofilms, they also produce antibiotics to suppress competitors. So you can basically find in any natural system, and we also found it in very remote places like Antarctica, where it is even related to cold adaptation of microorganisms, you find antibiotics. Antibiotic production by microbes, but also the antibiotics itself. And nowadays, with the exploration of antibiotics for human health use, this problem has increased a lot. And this is actually because we expose a lot of antibiotics to microbes in certain applications, and one of the largest applications is actually in farms, so in agriculture. And by doing so, we actually select for microbes which are getting resistant. It's just a matter how microbes have to deal in the environment to survive. And once we have these resistant bacteria, it's just a matter of time that they get distributed and also globally distributed. And I have to say, I have seen antibiotics production in India. One of the major cities is Hyderabad, where antibiotics are produced also for European use. These antibiotics, to a large extent, also end up in the environment because they are just disposed in the river. And by doing so, we have a nice vector. Water can transport antibiotics dissolved, but they can also attach to surfaces and then get distributed in the environment. And the worst thing with microbes are well adapted to changing environments. They have mobile genetic elements, and by using different forms of mobile genetic elements, they can also exchange antibiotic resistance genes quite fast and efficiently. However, the problem even increases nowadays, and we will later hear also how global change is related to the problem of plastic pollution and antibiotic resistance. We see a clear effect of urbanization, climate change, and of course also plastic pollution in the way and mechanism how these resistance genes are spread all over the globe. And of course, this is a major problem. And you may have seen similar numbers, similar figures. Keep in mind that antibiotic resistance, meanwhile, or antibiotic resistant bacteria are meanwhile the major cause of death. And even in Europe, we have a high number of people dying every year. And the number is higher than, for example, HIV or AIDS, and also higher than malaria. So it's one of the 10 most pressing, urgent health threats of humans. So this is, I think, very important to keep in mind. And of course, it's also related to an enormous economical loss. And you see the projected number for 2050, it's 70 to 80 trillion euros loss per year. And how do these antibiotic resistance genes being distributed in the environment? I already mentioned they are used in different applications. One is, for example, animal husbandry, and also for human use in hospitals. We also use it often in households. I still remember that in the US, in the hotels you got soap where they had added antibiotics. So we have a lot of ways how antibiotic resistance is selected in the environment. And the worst is antibiotics then are transported into nature. We have a direct input via wastewater into natural waters, but we also have natural waters containing antibiotic resistance genes going to the soil, and then they can be taken up by plants, for example. So we have a vector to humans via food. We have vectors from wastewater and original water use, where we directly can take up, but we've heard most is actually via air. You also see it here on the big arrow. We take up antibiotic resistance genes also by respiring. So one of the major input in freshwater is via wastewater treatment plants. It's the biggest source of antibiotic resistance genes in the freshwater environment, but I can also add for microplastics. And the important point is you have to keep in mind microbes always experience a certain environment, and it's a super nice mixture for growth of also, for example, pathogens, which are also introduced in the wastewater. We have high nutrient concentration, often high temperature, and so on, providing ideal growth conditions for antibiotic-resistant bacteria, and they are often coupled with pathogens. And that gave the reason why we looked at a larger scale. I just give you now a kind of scientific presentation on the results we got from a study we did together with some Chinese colleagues on the Yangtze River. And the Yangtze River actually has its source in the Himalaya, which is relatively little influenced by human activities. And then we move down and we have major centers of human population. You see it here on the map. The red circles give you two of the major centers where population is highly increased. You see it at the gray shading. And in the lower graph, you also see that in particular for the free water phase, and also VWP stands for particles in the water, you see an increase in antibiotic resistance gene related to these human centers. However, you also see in the natural part in the Himalaya, you can also find antibiotic resistance genes, but they are different. And we looked a bit more detail in the different compartments we have studied. Again, the red shaded areas on the x-axis show you the population centers. And when you normalize, it becomes actually much clearer. So it's normalized against the number of 16S RNA genes, meaning a kind of abundance of microbes or of bacteria and archaea. And you see that in particular for the particles in the water, you see nicely that the relative number or the absolute number of genes in this case increases with population density. And it's particularly high in the estuary. And we also looked at the different antibiotics, which you see on the x-axis. And you see a clear pattern that certain antibiotics, and more scaring, the multi-drug resistance was pretty high in all compartments. And this was again related to population density. And there is also a comparable study available that was together with American colleagues, and they looked again on the distribution of antibiotics in the river, and you nicely see these two population centers. You have a clear increase of antibiotics concentrations, and then you compare it with the animal production, and that is also related to, you have higher human population, but you also have high population of animals. And then they did a kind of a graph, which I like. The elevation, of course, is negatively correlated to antibiotics in the river, because the higher you are in the Himalaya, the less people you have, and the more natural it is. So the absolute number of antibiotic resistant genes is relatively low. However, what you clearly see is that population leads to antibiotics use, and they end up in the river, mainly in dissolved form. And then the major source for antibiotics in the river are animals, and it's kind of indirect effect, because you produce a lot of nutrients, in particular total nitrogen, and that is also related to the absolute concentration of antibiotics in the river. And we also look at in the Berlin-Brandenburg area, because although there we have a gradient of a high population in the city of Berlin, and then a lower population in the surrounding. And we have a project from the Leibniz Foundation where we look actually along this gradient, and we can see we have an area which is quite natural, quite close to Berlin actually. You have the city area, but you also have the agricultural area, mainly in the northeast of Berlin. And that gives us a possibility to also look at the spread of antibiotic resistance genes and also of plastics in the environment. And we can state that we, of course, find higher concentrations in a more urbanized, so in the more city-like areas. And then, just to give you a glimpse, this is similar to the study we did in the Yangtze River. We also find specific antibiotics in the different parts, and you see that wastewater treatment plants are one of the major sources for different antibiotics. And you also see that in the farm or in the urban and rural sediment, we also have slightly higher numbers of certain antibiotics. I don't go into detail, but just as a take-home message, you see specific patterns, let's say footprints of antibiotic resistance genes related to animal production and also to human population density. And just to give you a glimpse, this is also related to microplastic. You know, we have primary and secondary microplastic. Primary microplastic is what you all use often on a daily basis in toothpaste, for example. You often have, or in cosmetic products, you have microplastics, and then also secondary microplastic is the one which gets degraded. And as mentioned before, most is ending up in the wastewater, and the wastewater treatment plants, if they are not equipped with special filters, I've heard in Switzerland it's already implemented for quite some time, that microplastic can be taken out of the water quite efficiently. But if not, they get in contact to antibiotics in the wastewater, which also has hospital effluents. And these antibiotics can adsorb to specific plastic types because there's a surface charge. And then often you also have antibiotic-resistant bacteria, often also pathogens, which can attach to the microplastic and forms biofilms. So you have a closed cycle of amplifying the problem, or two major health threats you amplify by bringing them together. And with that, I'm at the end, and I want to thank you for your attention. But again, my working group and our big hope is now on Matthew, that he gets more insight into the antibiotic resistance spread and type of antibiotic resistant genes on microplastic in Tulip. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Professor Hans-Peter. I believe for the interest of time, we are skipping the open discussion at this point, or we still have?
We still have some time.
Okay,
and
perfect.
If you have questions, please. Good. We had a question online, and that was really practical questions to Joanna, or to you all, I guess. So Soraya is asking, you mentioned that it's scientists' responsibility to make some outreach and to speak out. And the question is, how can scientists come in contact with policymakers, given your experience?
That's a very good question. Thank you so much. Again, it's a personal opinion. But probably many of you will disagree. But we see now, for example, in the context of climate change, how scientists, or at least part of the scientists, are also feeling that they have the responsibility to be more active and more vocal and to really lobby for something that is so crucial. I think it's important that there's a better interface between science and communication. I know not all the scientists have the capacity to also explain things in a way that can be understood, but many scientists do. So I think it's very good to identify critical people. We have the example of Carl Sagan, for example, a big communicator of science and a scientist himself. So I think we need to invest really and having the intention to participate in, scientists participate in more in forums that are more open to general public.
Sure.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And this is also a vote that scientists also get actively involved in participating. In Germany, for example, we have advisory boards of the German government, and everybody can actually contribute. And if you need information, if you're sitting in Berlin, you're close to politics, and it's much easier to get involved. But it's possible for everybody of you scientists, and you feel the need to communicate and actually get in contact to the decision makers. There are ways to do. Yeah, so please get engaged.
One more question. Come on, please.
Thank you so much. My name is Chanel Molopo, and I'm a postdoctoral research fellow from the University of the Western Cape in South Africa. So I just wanted to add to what the comment on just science communication. So currently I'm conducting a scoping review on the translation of climate change research into policy and action. And what I have found so far, it's not complete, but what we have found so far is that there's actually very little even in terms of understanding of what knowledge translation is and what can be done. So we started off with about 1,700 articles that just had broad ideas on translation of climate change research into health policy. And we've only now ended up with only 5 of those that have just actually been included for now the analysis and the synthesis. So if you're interested, soon, hopefully, I'll be able to publish that paper and share that with you. But I just wanted to highlight how that area is very important, and also I'm also very interested to see what are the actions and how that action can successfully be implemented. Thank you.
Thank you.
There's also one more question. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Shannon McMahon. I'm with Heidelberg University. I really appreciated the inclusion of an example where someone or some group or some government is doing this well. You mentioned that they've introduced a policy in Switzerland to try to remove microplastics from wastewater. Do you have 1 or 2 other examples, it could be at a local or a regional or a national level, where some group is getting it right? And you think, oh, I wish more governments, local or national, would also consider doing this in their settings?
Specifically for plastics, you
Or
mean?
AMR, you can pick, or the intersection of both.
Any brilliant idea? Example?
That is a really good question, and this is actually a problem because there aren't so many examples. There are more examples I'm not aware of, but they are not very obvious, yeah? And I think we need more of these positive examples that things can be done. But I agree also with the first speaker, the best is to avoid the pollution, the production, right? So in particular for plastic, we should think for alternatives. That's also what you showed. There are small initiatives like with a toothbrush, but there can be also avoidance on a much larger scale, especially the single-use plastics we all use basically because it's mainly packaging, but I think it needs to be replaced.
Okay, thanks.
If I can just quickly also comment on that, well, I think it's clear for all of us that plastic pollution is complicated to address. Unfortunately, I believe now that the solution has to be a lot top-down, so really in terms of regulations, because even if people have the right intention to avoid using plastic, very often they don't have alternatives, at least cheap, accessible. And I'm thinking, for example, I worked a lot in Indonesia, and it's probably the same as in Philippines. People cannot afford to buy things also in large amounts, so they have everything packaged unidosely. That's one thing. The other is that the food used to be wrapped in organic stuff and now it's wrapped in plastic, and people still have the same behavior of just discarding it down. So yeah, I think there has to be a strong political commitment, because I don't think it's going to be just the industry deciding to do that. There are lots of little initiatives, and I think yeah, we just need to search of local communities deciding, for example, to do alternative packaging with the natural fibers, which also kind of develops the local community and has this economic side of it. So. Nevertheless, we should not say, you know, oh, I don't have a choice. So we always can do a little bit, but we also have to press a lot our decision makers and policy makers to go into the big game.
Thank you for that very insightful discussion, and thank you, Giovanna and Hans-Peter. I think it's very important that you've emphasized the criticality of the power of the bidirectional knowledge co-production, the potency of science communication, and the power of integrated knowledge translation to ensure that our research findings are translated into local practices and policies. For our third speaker, I'd like to introduce an Iker Basque research professor, I hope I pronounced that correctly, at the Basque Center for Climate Change in Bilbao, Spain, where he coordinates the research line on adaptation. He holds a doctorate in environmental engineering from ETH Zurich and was postdoctoral researcher at AVAG, Switzerland, and at the Canada Research Chair on Water Quality Modeling at Université Laval, Quebec, Canada. To discuss climate change effects on water systems, please welcome Professor Dr. Mark Neumann.
Thank you, Mark, for the nice introduction. I'm going to actually end with co-production, the word you just introduced before. I was asked to speak on climate change impacts on water systems, and of course the IPCC has about 1,000 pages on this, where they document really well the last 6 years of research on this topic, and it's huge. So what I'm going to try and do is just give a very, very top-down overview, and then go into some details related to co-production and how to address complexity and interconnectedness. So I always try to bring a recent example, and of course reality has overtaken me, as you have all witnessed this week traveling to the conference here. So I still have the one from the events from the week before in Brazil, and maybe it also does actually highlight also some differences between the context in Central Europe and in Latin America. So just take a moment and reflect on this picture, and think with your expertise and research interests, what could the impacts of this be on the systems that you study, or the questions that you study? And we'll come back to this. There's a small, not an exam, but just, we'll come back to this at the end, to what you are thinking. Okay. So one thing for me when I see this picture is that we are dealing with interconnected drivers, not just climate change. So we're dealing with other processes such as urbanization, land use changes, social vulnerability, and climate change, and we could list others here. If we isolate climate change out of these drivers, in general, what the climatologists are telling us that what we need to expect with a warming climate is that the hydrological cycle will accelerate. It's quite easy to understand. So we have more solar radiation, higher temperatures, we have more evapotranspiration, the atmosphere can hold more humidity. So you can imagine that this is just getting faster, this cycle. And what this then leads to is that we have increases or changes in trends and changes in variability. We see typically things that wet seasons get wetter, dry seasons get drier, wet regions get wetter, dry regions get drier. But we also see a lot that we can expect a lot of changes at subannual level, so seasonal or single events. Because sometimes you might hear something that, oh, actually the annual precipitation will not change that much. But when you dig down into it, you see the annual season not, but the variability. So you might have longer dry seasons and stronger rainfall events in the humid season. So if you have the annual rainfall just coming in one event and then you have a drought for the rest of the year, you can imagine what an uncomfortable climate that would be. So we have impacts which, like most of you have heard of or know: sea level rise, soil humidity changes, the oceans that we often don't take into account as much. Like last year we had these very strong marine heat waves in different parts of the world. And then also we typically work with these lists or chapters where we look at different impacts, but very clearly there are chains of impacts, so that these impacts themselves are connected. So we have temperature as a driving force, changing rainfall patterns, changing drought patterns, changing flood patterns, changing ice and snow melt patterns, changing sea level. 12 years ago, when I joined the Basque Center for Climate Change, I was asked to give a talk in a summer school on impacts of climate change on water systems. And this was a slide I came up with there to go a bit deeper into this thinking of how things are interconnected, and also how things do not happen in isolation. So what we very often will observe is these kind of situations where we have prolonged periods of drought, and this is just illustrative. That will decrease river flow. That means you have less water in the river, so when you have spills of wastewater and so on, you have increased concentrations, so increased pollution that can lead to eutrophication and algal blooms. You can have increased sedimentation in the river. You have water scarcity in general impacting a whole load of sectors, such as cooling capacity from thermal power plants, hydropower production, irrigation, availability of industrial and residential water. And often the droughts might be accompanied by heat waves that put additional pressures onto these systems. And then we see that after such periods, often we might have periods of extreme events that then, for example, flush out all the sediments that were built up. So we get these pollution peaks going through the system, lead to flooding, and so on. And after the flooding, we might have a heat wave again, which might pose risks for health impacts of waterborne, foodborne diseases, vector-borne diseases. So what we see that this is pointing towards that we need to understand each subsystem, each type of event, each type of impact, but we also need to understand how these elements are interconnected and how an event or hazard can propagate, lead to cascading impacts, spread across systems and sectors, and all the indirect impacts that can be a result from this. So what we see to address this, we have conceptual frameworks that are quite theoretical. I will just briefly show two of them. And then we have tools, and I will talk there about one of them. So I think all of you, this is also an important aspect in the Tulip project, are familiar with the One Health approach. I have here an illustration by one of our PhD students. So looking at human health, animal health, and the health of the environment together simultaneously, and understanding how they are linked across the impacts. Another model, a bit less well-known, biopsychosocial model. We have again the three pillars: human, animal, environment. And this goes back to the original work by George Engel, who was making a point of moving beyond the biomedical focus within medicine. And he introduced this idea of looking not simultaneously just at the three different pillars, but also looking simultaneously across the different scales we have in each pillar. So of course this becomes highly complex now. So if we looking at the same time at the cells in the human and the population at the animal, and we're thinking about all these possible connections within one study, that kind of complicates our lives as scientists. So there are some methods to maybe not solve this, but at least to try and start to address some of these challenges around interconnectedness. I'm just going to show you an example from some research that we've been, or a tool that we've been working on in our group, called cognitive mapping. And basically, the idea is we have the 4 experts, or the 50 experts that we had before when I asked you the question. And each of you had a model in your head, a conceptual model. So one of these, in this case, these 4. And the question is, well, how does that look like if we connect all these 50 models into one model? So I would love if I had a technique to put the 50 models that you've just created, be able to extract them and show you the result. So maybe in 5 years you ask me again and we can do some exercise that could do that. So they're a bit more laborious, the ways that we've been doing it to date. So I'm just going to show you one quick example from a study of heat wave impacts in Madrid, where we asked experts, and this is both from academia but also from practice. So this could have been a health practitioner in a hospital, an epidemiologist, a parks manager, a civil engineer who designs the water system. And the question was, how do heat waves impact your city, and what interventions do you think should be taken? So this is the example of one interview with one expert. So at the beginning, what they do is they list the different concepts that they think are important to be addressed. And then in the second part of the interview, they hypothesize on how these elements are connected. And just briefly here, we have extreme temperature affecting morbid mortality. And then we have here some interventions that are proposed, like green urban areas, blue urban areas, dwelling, better insulation of buildings that improve urban living quality, and an improved urban living quality leads to a reduction of morbid mortality. We have also the possibility of more, is cooling needs for buildings, legionellosis, and so on. So we have this is just illustrating how the thinking of a person in such a causal loop diagram could result in such a graph of interconnectedness already just from one person. So you realize when you're talking to an expert that they don't have this in their head. This emerges in the interview with that person, but they have the knowledge in the head that allows to produce this. So you do this exercise with 25 different experts in the themes or sectors that you are interested in. It can include researchers, but also decision makers, practitioners. Then you go through an aggregation process and you put them into one model and you end up with something like this, which is, of course, like you may say, well, first of all, it's interesting just to see, okay, this is really showing us the complexity in the system. And yeah, it might be a bit daunting, but of course you can start then extracting things on this, and you can start also doing simulations on this. So, for example, you can take this and you can enforce, you might have a node on nature-based solutions or green infrastructure. You force that node, and you see how forcing that node propagates through the network and impacts other nodes and might even feed back to that node itself. So of course, this is far away from process-based models or phenomenological models, but it is something that allows to give you a first screening of how things are interconnected, of maybe also pointing towards which elements should be included in a more in-depth analysis that are not typically included, to then be analyzed with more sophisticated process modeling. Okay, so just a couple of slides to show how such types of analysis, or what they can help with. So they can help us with overcoming this well-known silos. They can help us with preventing the one event or one hazard in one sector at a time analysis. They can help detect potential unintended consequences of actions, with some action causing harm in another area or sector, and therefore also reduce risk of maladaptation. They can help in developing a shared understanding across specialities, because each of the experts realizes that they have contributed to this final map, and they are interested in putting questions to this map, in seeing how their areas of research relate to others. And we can identify synergies in actions. So these are things we were discussing yesterday, that you might propose an action for cooling, which might also have benefits in other sectors or on other challenges. And it also helps us in looking for solutions closer to the source. So with this, I was trying to make the point that understanding, managing, adapting water systems Also that in the way that you're doing it in Tulip requires a complex system approach and tools for knowledge integration to support us with this. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for this great overview on the interconnections between climate change. So we heard about climate change, but also aspects of cognitive science and especially the interlinkages. I'm sure lots of you have questions. We're running a bit out of time and we want to make sure that we have enough time for the coffee break, which means that we will save the question that you had on this talk for after Marina's talk, which is coming next. There we have a bit of a Q&A session. And now I have the privilege to introduce the person that actually needs no introduction, because you've probably seen her running around behind the scenes and organizing all of this and bringing all of us together here. She's the reason why we're here in the Alta Aula. And Marina is the junior group leader at Heidelberg University and the co-lead of the Tulip project. She has a multidisciplinary background in epidemiology, modeling, biology, and economics. And her main research interest is in understanding the impacts of environmental degradation on health of people, animals, and ecosystems. So the One Health approach that we just heard about in the previous presentation. Marina, thank you for your talk.
Hi, and thank you so much, my colleagues, Joanna, Hans-Peter, Mark, giving an overview of the three global phenomena, going in details. My simple task is to just a little bit discuss the interlinkages between them in detail and maybe set up the scene for our panel discussion. And that's what I will do. So you already heard from the talk by Hans-Peter about antimicrobial resistance, spread of antibiotics in the environment, aquatic environment. From Joanna, we heard as well of the spread of plastic and microplastic as well in environment, in air, but also in water. And I would like to say that those things converge in water, environment, and particularly imagine yourself microplastic particles floating in the water, meeting sometimes floating bacteria, and microplastic have very nice hydrophobic surfaces where bacteria of different types can get attached to it and start forming colonies. Colonies meaning they come together, starting to produce certain proteins and carbohydrates, and when they come together and form this biofilm that was named the term, what you can see there, this would be, oh, I don't know. Ah, I don't know. All right. Apologies. Yeah, that's perfect. This would be a microplastic in the aquatic environment. This would be floating bacteria, and this is microplastic coming to water from different sources, including aquaculture, agriculture runs of hospital, wastewater treatment plant. We already heard about that. And in rivers or in lakes, this can meet and biofilm could be formed. And this bacteria, when they colonize, they make a community that is called specific to microplastic plastisphere. And this community is actually stronger in terms of resistance. So because of these extracellular polymeric substances that is formed like more or less like a glue around the bacteria colonies, which makes them mostly like 200 times more resistance to antibiotics than just a single living bacteria alone. And so they can be on the microplastic and be already, because of the biofilm formation, harder to treat. We know that biofilms can be everywhere, not only microplastic, they can also partially feel it on your teeth in the morning and so on. And we also have this problematics in hospitals, and the biofilm makes it harder to treat with antimicrobial and substances. Also, this one mechanism, another one is horizontal gene transfer that also Hans-Peter said about. The bacteria can exchange the genetic material that already codes for antibiotic resistance, and for example, harmless bacteria can have this antibiotic resistant genes by nature and can share it with the harmful bacteria for harmful for our own health. Therefore, harmful bacteria can actually acquire antibiotic resistance genes. And they can also spread in the water. But sometimes this biofilm can break and the bacteria can go out and additionally further floating in the water systems. Another aspect, how microplastic is actually amplifying the antimicrobial resistance spread and bacterial spread in the environment, is through just mechanistic transport. They're known as like floating carriers of AMR in the water system. This is like a good presentation of the water system. And imagine yourself that the microplastic particles and biofilm on them, they can travel in the water environment through the hydrological process, through just river flows, and collecting from different sources, like such a wastewater treatment plant, where there are a lot of pollutants, a lot of bacteria. Of course, they're getting a little bit less concentrated downflow. However, this one of the functions of microplastic particles is to transport bacteria, even, for example, such as cholera, typhus bacteria, downstream to the river, and people and animals, including livestock and wildlife, can be exposed to the bacterial disease as well as to antibiotic resistance and so on. And why it's more interesting, you can also say, okay, the organic particles can do that as well. Yes, that's true, but microplastic is known to live much longer, and to make again a comparison, a half-life of a microplastic is around from 100 to 1,000 years, where organic matter lives in water around 20 days to maybe up to 3-4 years. Therefore, the microplastic can spread the bacteria to further environments and can transfer it from very polluted environments to less polluted environments, including in groundwaters. To say the least, I mean, in Europe, there were studies identifying antimicrobial resistance in groundwater, in fresh lake, and so on. So, yeah, it's one interesting phenomenon to consider when we think about science and think about solutions. Climate change was introduced by Mark. Climate change has a lot of effects, right, in terms of health, and it's a standing problem on its own in the global scale, but it also does have effect on the system that we are looking into, particularly through hydrological effects. So interestingly that because of the rising temperatures and water temperatures, climate change can enhance bacterial growth, can facilitate through the temperature suitability, the resistant genes transfer, as well as it can facilitate selection for more resistant or more bacteria that can adapt to these temperatures. It's less still understood and requires more investigation, as well as it influences the travel and concentration elements that we spoke about. Imagine yourself flooding that is already because of the water going out of the river bodies. It can also affect the lands around it and basically contaminate the shores and agricultural floods. But if you consider drought or when there is no water, we've seen it, for example, in Italy. We've seen the droughts in Italy, and the Philippines also experience droughts as well. Because of less water, the pollutants become more concentrated in the environment, and again, of course, facilitate antibiotic resistance occurrence and evolution because of increased selection pressure. Still has to be investigated, and so on. Other effects of climate change can go. Hans-Peter said, he showed a big wastewater treatment plant where the bacteria and microplastic and antibiotics come in touch in a very concentrated environment. And it's very important to understand that those facilities are man-made and they have limitations to the natural disasters such as climate change. And climate change such as precipitation, heavily precipitation, can induce overflow of these wastewater treatment plants, and all the plastic, all the bacteria, all the antibiotics will go into downflow of the river without being treated. Therefore, we need to consider, even though we know the climate change affecting us, there are still limits to how we can adapt it. It's one of them. And of course, it influenced the exposure of animals and humans through different adaptation practices, collecting of water, using certain polluted water for irrigation. It's still under research, I believe, or I hope, and it's less understood. And I want to say that, that interestingly, antimicrobial bacteria you can't see. Well, you can see probably the biofilm and colonies when they started to grow to scale. You cannot see plastic with naked eye, only particles that you can see, but microplastic is hard to see with naked eye. As well as it's very hard to a human understanding to perceive climate change. Those are big, unseen threats, literally working on a global scale, and they have tremendous impact on health of animals, humans, and ecosystem. And Hans-Peter already gave very interesting statistics on mortality of AMR due to AMR compared to HIV and malaria, leading killers in our society. And what can actually also can do the antimicrobial resistance to our own health, it's, I can name a few examples here. So exposure, as far as I understand, to microplastic has a lot of consequences on its own. Antimicrobial resistance, you can get bacteria through exposure to water, in hospitals, of course, in different environments, through consumption of the contaminated food, such as seafood or fish or meat products. And if they are start to reside in the gut, the microbacteria, the antibiotic-resistant bacteria, and under certain, it will increase the unbalanced intestinal flora. Also, I heard that treatment with antibiotics connected now currently with the mental health, with the depression, also interesting to investigate. But when this bacteria started to misbehave and, for example, cause certain diseases, and we will take drugs, the first reaction will be take antibiotics, hoping that they will kill the bacteria, but it will kill the bacteria that are friendly to our guts, leaving the superbugs untouched, right? And it's the first line of antibiotics when they're applied. If it doesn't work, the second and the third line of antibiotics usually applied, and then they are usually with a higher toxicity, and this also influences our kidneys, our liver, with increased toxicity overall. And if it doesn't help, the mechanistic already, such as surgeries and things like that, come in place as a treatment where people can stay in hospital for 6 months or had to go through recurrent surgeries. So this is just to connect those things, and we have still a lot of gaps, especially bringing this nexus together in science and policy. We need to understand from the evidence production point of view how humans and animals and ecosystem exposed and through what pathways and in what concentrations to the microplastic associated AMR. Longitudinal studies are needed in terms of combined effects, again, on health and well-being of this interlinked system. We always see, like silos, also in research, looking in this particular pollutant, in this particular resistance bacteria, and this particular microplastic. What about these things work in the system? So we might want to look into the health effects as well of the system, as well as we need to bring the climate change into the picture and understand how it influences on microplastic associated AMR spread in the environments. And of course, vulnerable populations such as children, women, pregnant women, of course, elderly, who will suffer through toxicity of antimicrobial resistance and so on, as well as the availability of antibiotics and new antibiotics is diminishing, because we're losing actually the war to antimicrobial resistance, and I don't want to be a doomsday person, but we are hitting the day prior. Alexander Fleming, found the penicillin in 1928, where we as humanity used to treat tuberculosis just by exposing people to the sun. And that's what we're heading now, and it's a little bit scary to understand. Therefore, we need to find solutions, and here we need to have actors across all structures of the society, scientists working together with policymakers, working together with businesses, working together with communities and individuals. We need to, of course, understand the spread of microplastic associated in AMR in the environment. We need to have a good surveillance tools for that to develop effective interventions, policies, and we need to do it in an integrated manner and try to understand and implement mitigation strategies that address all microplastic, plastic, antibiotic use, as well as climate change. And with this note, I would like to thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marina, for bringing all of this together, the three domains that we heard before. And we're in Germany. Germans like to be on time. And for 11 a.m., we have a coffee break scheduled. Thankfully, Marina already did us a favor because she already provided something that we're supposed to do in this session until 11 a.m., which is a synthesis of the three talks that we heard before. So we already got that. But we have a few minutes for some questions from the audience, and we can already see the first question right here. Please let us know who you are and who you're addressing with the question.
Yeah, Hervé Ras, Monaco Scientific Center and member of the Tulip Consortium. Marina, thank you for your presentation, and thank you for mentioning that wastewater treatment plants are vulnerable to climate change and flooding and sea level rise. What do you think about the continuing use of biomedia filters in wastewater treatments, those round plastic filters that are designed to attract bacteria in wastewater treatments, and they go by thousands in the ocean and in the environment when there is a flooding episode? And second part of the question, do you think that Tulip can influence the policy on using those biomedia plastic filters?
Hans-Peter, would you like also to come here to talk about that? I think Hans-Peter want to also give some example. That is not nice. Good.
Yeah, we actually had a very bad experience in our institute because we had used them in the aquaculture to actually purify the water, and due to some failures, these particles got released into the environment. And now, if you are at Lake Müggelsee in Berlin, from time to time you still find some, because they have been released in large numbers, and it's definitely a big issue. It's very problematic because you cannot avoid this spoilage, especially when you talk about extreme weather events. It will be even more amplified. I think it's a really bad idea to use this kind of plastic for this purpose. You could also probably use some organic surfaces which wouldn't last so long, but they would have the same effect, because what you're interested is you get biofilm formation which has a redox gradient, and that's important for nitrogen removal, denitrification, and that can be also achieved otherwise. So I think we need to think about alternatives.
I would like to reflect this, as well as with the climate change and microplastic. We had a discussion about maladaptation, right, and solutions that we do not first gather all evidence about, and we might want to be first clever, and as scientists at least try to connect all potential negative or unintended consequences of our solutions to the problems that we look, and try to at least also synthesize that evidence of these particular bad examples, and try to avoid and prepare, or at least innovate solutions that would allow us to prevent this. And I believe that working with nature, as Hans-Peter suggests, is the best way to go and to avoid grey infrastructure and actually creating much more plastic to solve the plastic pollution. Thank you.
Thank you so much. If there's another question in the room, we have time for one more question, or by the online audience. Yes, over there.
Stefan Zimmermann, Department of Infectious Diseases here from Heidelberg. So we were focusing and really mentioning the problem of antimicrobial resistance. You've shown that the multi-resistant bacteria, of course, they can form biofilms on plastics, on microplastics. And we know that the current streams in the sea, they can transport this microplasma with the resistance genes, with the resistant bacteria to everywhere, from the Bay of Bengal somewhere to the Antarctic Sea. How big is the risk of really spilling this antimicrobial resistance globally and to animals, to whales, to krill in the Antarctic Sea, where never any antibiotic has been used? Thank you.
At least when you look at specific antibiotics, which are largely or used to a large extent in animal husbandry and also in hospitals, you would definitely increase the chance. I wouldn't say the chance is so high in Antarctica, because you still have the circumpolar current, which avoids that a lot of material is actually deposited in Antarctica itself. And I can tell you the highest source are the scientists, unfortunately, being in Antarctica. I mean, this is normal, yeah. We also use plastics in our scientific lives, unfortunately. But I think locally it can be a major problem, especially in estuaries, where you have huge accumulation of plastics coming down the rivers and also getting trapped at certain places, and then you have a high exposure, for example, of animals to these probably multi-drug resistant pathogens.
We have a couple of questions online, actually not one as I expected, but three. I will, I think, address two, and again to Hans-Peter. Have you identified antibiotic genes coding for antibiotic resistance genes in your research on microplastic? And the second one, whether you know of effective ways to remove the antibiotics from water?
We have not specifically addressed this topic, because this is a content we do in Tulip. We see that the spread of antibiotic resistance genes due to mobile genetic elements is higher on biofilms of certain microplastic. That is another EU project. We have Plastics Fate, where we specifically look at this. But we can assume, because we find pathogens on microplastic, that some of these are also carrying antibiotic resistance genes. And as I have shown in the example of the Yangtze, or even in Berlin-Brandenburg, we have a lot of beta-lactamates antibiotic resistance in the water on particles, and part of it is definitely also plastics.
And I would like to open the panel discussion session that will address the issues of exploring solutions through science, policy, and community engagement, as well as translation science to policy. We discuss issues of global plastic pollution, climate change, and antimicrobial resistance spread in the environment. We also looked to interconnectedness and stated that yes, we need to address them in the system. We need to address them through collaboration across sectors, as well as through science and policy. And I would like to acknowledge the really an elephant in the room, this one, that even though we are advocating here against the plastic pollution, we as organizers also procured the plastic bottle to give people water. I would like to say that, yes, hypocrisy there. We will try to get it back, and we will try to work with our partners here to make another chair or two. So please give them back if you could. And what we need a better sustainable solutions even for people like myself to try to organize and make your life or your visit here comfortable and enjoyable. So here what we will do, we will discuss the potential solutions and to the problems that we stated before. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Marina. And now we're moving into the panel discussion where we will bring together people from science and from policy. And it's my pleasure to introduce the panelists for today. And first, we're starting with Lucia Escati, who is a veterinarian graduate from the University of Buenos Aires in Argentina. And she holds a master's degree in public health from the École des Hautes Études en Santé Publique in France, and works as a communication officer at the World Organization for Animal Health. And she's responsible for disseminating crucial information and initiatives related to health challenges at the human-animal environmental interface, so exactly what we're talking about here. And one of her key focuses lies in raising awareness about antimicrobial resistance through different initiatives. I will introduce the other speakers as well, and then we will start with the first speaker with some introductory remarks, and then we will go into the discussion. Next, we have Denise Margaret Matthias, who is a professor in ecosystem-based transformation management in UNESCO Biosphere Reserves at the Biosphere Reserves Institute of Eberswalde University in Berlin for sustainable development. Prior to joining the university, she held research and postdoctoral positions in projects focusing on grassland sustainability, climate change adaptation, and indigenous forestry livelihoods. She graduated from the Center for Development Research at the University of Bonn with a PhD in agricultural sciences and is an associate of the Indigenous Network Non-Timber Forest Products Exchange Program Asia. She is also the lead author of the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, thematic assessment on the interlinkages among biodiversity, water, food, and health. And there are lots of other things I could talk about, but this is a brief summary. And then we have Doc Anna here, who was also kindly introduced by Mark before. And she's the Director 4 of the RITM, which is the research arm of the Department of Health in the Philippines. And she's a doctor lawyer with a master's course in management major in hospital administration. And she is basically the person who endorses the research findings to the Secretariat of the Department of Health in the Philippines. Very glad to have you here with us. And then we have Joachim Bockler, who I really don't have to introduce. You all know him already. He is here at Heidelberg University as the chair at HI, the Heidelberg Institute for Global Health, and the IWR, the Institute for Scientific Computing, and works very closely with Marina and many people here in the room. And then we have Christina Arnes-Sanz, who is a Master of Public Health student in the Epidemiology of Microbial Diseases Department of Yale University, concentrating on climate change and health. She leads European youth engagement in different UN processes as the focal point for Europe for the United Nations major group of children and youth, and is also a member of the Youth for Health Network of the WHO Office for Europe. I know her from the past COPs. She's very active at the conferences of the parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and really one of the major youth advocates for climate change and health. And we're very glad to have the panelists here with us, and we will start with some opening remarks, very short impulse, and then we will go into the discussion. We have prepared some questions, but you are also free to ask questions here in the room, but also from the online participants. And we will start with a few notes directly from Lucia. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Well, at first I would like to thank you for inviting me to participate in this panel. When I was a veterinary student in Argentina, I could never ever have imagined that one day I was going to be here discussing with people from many different disciplines about antimicrobial resistance, but here we are. So as I am a veterinarian, I always like to try to understand our relationship with animals. And the reality is that since us as humans, we inhabit this planet, animals have played an essential role in our lives and our sustainabilities. And as we like to say at the World Organization for Animal Health, animals, humans, and the environment are all intrinsically linked. And this means that we share land and resources, but we can also share pathogens. Resistance strain of pathogens could be transmitted between and within human, animals, and plant populations, and through the environment as aquatic ecosystems, as we are seeing in this event. This is known as antimicrobial resistance. It's today one of the most important global health challenges, and it was mentioned before, is responsible already for over 1 million human deaths. And this is without considering the animal suffering, consequences in livelihoods, food security, economies. So this is partially a natural process, but it could be accelerated by the overuse and misuse of antimicrobials across sectors, but also by climate change, pollution. And so I would like to highlight that these three factors are mostly driven by human activities. And in this context, I do believe that science, policy, but also communications, that's the area where I work, could help mitigate this risk.
Thank you so much, and we will continue directly with Denise's points.
All right. If it's possible, I would like to stand up because I couldn't see the people. Yeah. So anyway, good morning to everyone, and thank you very much for the invitation to join Tulip, the Science Advisory Board, and to also be here today, even after what Marina was mentioning yesterday, the past days, the extreme rain and flooding in the south of Germany, where I was coming from. So I couldn't join you yesterday because I was traveling for 12 hours from Munich. So, but I would like to give you a perspective, primarily from my research in the Philippines, and also going back to what Joanna mentioned earlier. And so I work a lot with indigenous communities, and one of the things that I noticed even before was that what Joanna mentioned. So they're used to just throwing, packaging, etc., because in the environment. So you don't have proper waste management in these rural areas, in the mountain areas. And because primarily they were used to having natural things. But when plastic came into the picture, there was no education that came in. And we know as well from an economic perspective that there is this concept of the bottom of the pyramid, right? So the economic concept saying that there's more profit with the small sachets, so with this small packaging where you have a little bit of shampoo, soap, and that the FMCG, or the fast-moving consumer goods, the companies are actually promoting. And this is also what Professor Landrigan was saying earlier. It's not just about the plastic waste, but also about putting a cap on plastic production. And so, on the one hand, we know that the Philippines is one of the top plastic polluters, and then everyone, maybe online, you will see saying like, oh, these uneducated people, they're just throwing these things, etc. But that's just one part of the problem, right? So the other part of the problem, we have also indiscriminate plastic production, and again, thinking about the economic concept of BOP, or bottom of the pyramid, how do we solve this altogether? And therefore, for me, working with indigenous communities, with the vulnerable populations that Marina also mentioned as one of the gaps, right? We have to make sure that we don't see them always as antagonists, because actually, even within climate change, so these indigenous communities that I work with, they're at the front line, right? They're the frontliners, and so they're the ones who really feel the impact of climate change. And now going through the issue of antimicrobial resistance, you have all of these plastics just scattered in the area. And this is a gap that maybe something that we can collaborate in, because no one is looking at that, like how the biofilms, for example, could be just forming out there in the indigenous communities in their local areas, but no one is looking at it. And so I would really try to think of it, as also Marina mentioned in her presentation earlier, from a systems thinking perspective. And by the way, without leaving out Italy, I'm not sure if you know that one of the fathers of plastic is actually coming from Italy, Giulio Natta. So I just so happen to know because I have friends and family who are living where he is coming from, in Imperia, in Genova. And this is also, I guess we will also learn something from this, right? So he got the Nobel Prize in Chemistry. And during that time, it was well celebrated. But when we look at this from a historical perspective, we know that there could be the unintended consequences. And so for us, it's very, I guess it's also important to also not just look at the snapshot today, but also have a look from before, as what Joanna mentioned before, indigenous communities only have natural packaging, etc., and how this evolved, how these practices evolved, and maybe add a little bit more of futures thinking, right? So scenarios, etc. So how could this further develop in the future? Which is something that might have been missing when Giulio Natta and Ziegler as well was developing this plastic process. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Denise. And we will continue with a short impulse by Doc Anna.
Yes. Good afternoon. I'd like to stand also because of my challenge height, so I can see the people at the back. First, I'd like to thank, of course, the organizers for inviting us from the Philippines and also some of the delegates from the Research Institute for Tropical Medicine. So in my talk, I'd just like to emphasize on 3 aspects. First is about the interdisciplinary approach in the convergence of microplastics, antimicrobial resistance, and of course, pollution. Now, the second one that I would like also to talk about is about the importance of lived experiences in the community in helping solve these problems that we have in the environment. And the third one is also the power of bidirectional co-production of knowledge. So the first one is an interdisciplinary approach. Most of the time, health and animal science and the environmental science will always work in silos. Like they have their own policy makers, they have their own researches, but they do not talk to each other. So rare are the circumstances when people will go into meetings like this and discuss the effects of what is affecting health in humans, animal science, and environmental science. So I laud the Tulip project for bringing here all these people who are involved in these kinds of sciences. In the Research Institute for Tropical Medicine, we are involved as the research arm of the Department of Health of the Philippines. And in a lot of our researches, we have the One Health strategy or approach. We are working in collaboration with a lot of networks and organizations all over the world. And we have already done some studies interlinking animals, humans, and the environment itself. Now, the second aspect that I would like to give importance is the community itself. The people there, they have shared experiences. We need to talk to them. We need to find out what their needs are. We need to, if we will be given the chance, we need to have to live with them so that we will be able to find solutions that will be particular to the needs of the people in the community. So I think that's one crucial aspect that we also have to emphasize in our project. And the third one is also the power of bidirectional co-creation of knowledge. We have to have this mutuality, and we have to reach out to other stakeholders and to organizations so that our knowledge can be all pulled into one, and so that we will be able to come up with better solutions for everyone in the community and in the whole world. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Doc Anna, for these important words. And Joachim, from your perspective, what are the crucial points to tackle?
I'm also going to stand up. I was thinking about what you said on the communities, both of you. I think it's really important. There's a transition in the communities from actually having a sustainable way of dealing with food. For example, in Sri Lanka, when I was there, at the Ministry of Health even, we had food in these banana leaves, and you got your rice and your curries in a nice packet. I'm sure there will be a transition. Maybe it's already been there. And that transition is actually driven by someone to make profit, usually. We need to think about that. And I think if we consider that transition and the responsibility of the interest of making profit on these transitions into, one use only plastic packaging, for example, that's not handled in a good way today. There was a recent study in Scientific Advances around negotiations in Canada a month back, which were tracing back plastic products in the environment. And there was a few companies that stood out as the #1 polluters without actually taking more responsibility than hopefully recycling. Coca-Cola company was #1, of course, and there's a big list of those companies that I think by global policy should actually be forced to take responsibility if they introduce and transform a society to be dependent on other products where there's actually been good solutions before. So that's one point, I think, that's really important. That's a structural policy, global policy level, and hopefully the development with the UNEP and the plastic treaty is actually going to be able to tackle a bit of that. I think in order to support that, we need also a good arguments and good science. And one thing that we notice, I work a lot in the Lancet Countdown, which is basically developing research and taking research to policy to put people and health in the center of the climate negotiation. I think the plastic and the climate converge, and that could also be actually a really powerful argument for policymakers at the global scale and at the local scale to actually transform. But for that to happen, we need synthesis, and we need synthesis and research to policy reports and policy instruments and events that really brings these to the users at the different scales in an easy, digestible form. So I think we actually need something like, something similar like the countdown for plastic and the converging challenge in this space.
Thank you so much, Joachim. Already thinking about solutions, I really appreciate that. And making concrete proposals, maybe we can go out and work on that afterwards. Christina, from your perspective and from the youth perspective as well, what are the crucial points?
Yes, well, I guess I'll stand up again for this one. First of all, thank you so much for the invitation to Joachim, Marina, and of course Max as well. It's really an honor to be here 1 year after I left Heidelberg and the group. I'm now pursuing my master's, but I had a great time at the group, so it really means a lot to be here, and especially because this is related to what I've been working on apart from my master's at Yale. I'm representing European youth at different UN processes, as Max kindly said, and this is exactly what we are asking for: a seat at the table, a seat with, in a multidisciplinary setting, so that our concerns, our demands are also represented. Because as we can all imagine, and we are probably and hopefully aware, the children and youth, we are the ones who will mostly face this triple planetary health crisis of antimicrobial resistance, plastic pollution, and climate change. So that's why we are also the least responsible for this, and that should be remembered. And we really ask that in the negotiations, in the different processes, such as the plastic treaty now, but also the COPs or the Regional Forum on Sustainable Development in Geneva, where I was participating, and I will talk a little bit about it later. We want to be there and really have our say. And it's also very important that we have this kind of amazing projects that really connect the science and the policy in such an effective way to drive change. And especially, it's so inspiring to see so many PhD students, fellow friends and colleagues that are participating in this project and others, that they have the opportunity, because this is also a matter of intergenerational justice and this way to really ensure that once Tulip is over in 5 years, or the other project, there will be the voices of the youth of today are the leaders of tomorrow. And that's why I really thank for the opportunity and excited to be in the panel and keep discussing.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Christina. We've heard lots of different aspects already. I think we will have more than enough to talk about. The idea for the flow of the session now is that we will first remain a bit in the problem space. So if you're familiar with design thinking, for example, we'll concentrate a bit on the why and what is going on, what needs to change. And then we will go more into the how, because we're already thinking about solutions, but maybe we can use this to bring them together and to have a more specific concept. And then what are the next steps after this? So for the first part, for the why, we've prepared some questions, but if you have some questions, feel free to ask them. The first question would be to what you addressed before regarding the different silos. Doc Anna mentioned this, but also Lucia mentioned the One Health approach that is really required. Can you help us to understand better how this looks like in practice right now? Because we keep saying we don't talk to each other. I think this is an exception where you have people from lots of different backgrounds in one room and also in one project. What's going wrong at the moment, and what would be an approach, or what would be required so that the different disciplines work better together in a One Health approach? Maybe first, Doc Anna, on that?
Yes. Okay, thank you very much. I've been in the Department of Health for like around 20 plus years, but only during the last 3 years that we are keen into imbibing the One Health approach. So we've been having like a lot of meetings now under the Department of Health in the Philippines, requesting the different bureaus, and of course requesting also the Bureau of Animal Industry itself to join us in planning how we are going to contribute into animal health and human health at the same time, and as well as to prevent climate change and pollution further in the future. So this One Health approach that we are trying to imbibe now as a strategy and approach to maintain health in all aspects of the environment is quite unique in the past 3 or 4 years that I am now with the Department of Health. Previously, the Bureau of Animal Industry will have its own activities, its own meetings, and looking into the problems and solutions for the animal industry. On the other hand, the Department of Health will be doing the same. But yes, now we come together and then we discuss what kind of problems are we expecting in the next few years that come from animals and might affect the human population, and what pathogens might come from the human population that might affect also the animals. Like for example, we are currently undergoing a research in our institution whereby the bats in the different mountainous areas of the country, they found out that they have this Zika virus. So they found out that they are carrying the Zika virus. And the Zika virus can be transmitted to humans. And when they are transmitted to pregnant women, there are congenital abnormalities that might come out of the children or the babies which are delivered from the pregnant women. So if you are now into One Health strategy, you are able to detect what are the probable issues and challenges that you might face in the next few years. So working together that way, it gives us more confidence in trying to prepare and formulate policies and programs in the future rather than working in silos. So I think that's the good part of it.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So if I understand you correctly, we need, first of all, the expertise. We need to understand the different sectors. Then we need to develop the skills to communicate with each other so that we can collaborate with each other as well. Lucia, you're an expert on communication, and also you highlight that it's so important to have a One Health approach. What can we learn from you, from your approach, on how communication can work better between the different disciplines?
So I think we see every day in the news about different health threats, avian influenza, food safety issues, COVID-19, and we can see how these are intersectorial challenges, and there is no way that one sector can alone tackle any of these issues. The same is with antimicrobial resistance. So I would like to highlight very much the need for a One Health approach and cross-sectorial collaboration. So at WOA, we have partnered with WHO, FAO, and UNEP, and we have put together a global response to antimicrobial resistance. And in terms of communications, we work together to develop messages that are aligned, and we advocate together for better practices. Every year we celebrate a week on awareness. It's called the World AMR Awareness Week. It happens in November. And we also try to collaborate to develop showing materials and communication tools, so we are aligned on what we are saying. We can have one voice to explain what is AMR in a very simple way, in a very dynamic way, because it's still a very complex and abstract topic. So we try to break it down so everyone will understand it. The same way we collaborate in communication, we also do it in technical aspects. So together we develop capacity building activities for countries. We share data on antimicrobial use in animals and in humans. We try to build capacities in surveillance. So I can also provide another example. For instance, we provide a list of antimicrobials that are considered to be important for veterinary medicine. So this list brings some recommendations on how antimicrobials should be used in animal health, and it is fully aligned to the list of WHO on antimicrobials critically important for human health. This means that if an antimicrobial is important for human health, we recommend to avoid it or to use it only under specific conditions for animal health. So I think there are many concrete examples in the field on how this One Health approach could work. And the same way it's working at global level, it should also work at national level.
Excellent, thank you so much. I'm always looking at the audience. If someone has a question, just raise your hand. If not, we're already going a bit further into the solution space because you described some examples that you're providing. And Joachim earlier mentioned the Lancet countdown. And I think this can work as a good transition from understanding of the problem to developing solutions in an inter and multidisciplinary setting, because you have people from all different disciplines together there. Similarly, in the IPCC, for example, we try to bring people together from all different sectors, and they need to find a common language at first. What can we learn from the Lancet process, for example? How do you communicate with each other? How do you make sure that when you mention a term that you mean the same thing, for example?
It's a good question. I think it takes a lot of will and a strong leadership to convene the communities of scientists, which usually like to look at their small questions and debate them, the small questions, but it takes a strong leadership to bring it together under one umbrella and to set out the focus. We're going to provide, synthesize this evidence and generate evidence for this purpose, and we do it together, and then everyone chips in. It's very much a bottom-up activity because we have often the chance to do that, and it's just that without the convener, we would work more independently. And I think the same thing actually happens in Tulip, that we have these 3 converging topics and experts in each different fields, and also from the society policy perspective. Because of the project, now we work together and look at these things together. Because of the joint aims and objectives, we could actually try to figure out how we could join forces in order to provide what is actually needed for action in the society, as long as addressing these questions of scientific inquiry and curiosity, but all the time provide as much as we can in the process to society. And the Lancet Countdown is one excellent collaboration, I think, in doing that. There is other examples where it's really working out. We need more of those, I think. It's really fun as well, and you learn a lot from these communities and interdisciplinary settings as well.
I think it's an interesting tool to communicate the scientific evidence to policymakers, and if plastic and AMR community, research community could learn from climate and health Lancet Countdown, it would be an important tool for communicating the scientific evidence to policy actions. And when now we're in a space of how trying to solve the problems, and I have the question regarding the system thinking. We talked about that, and we also had presentation, and we talked about that all of those phenomena work in the system and then interlinked. And going back to type of monitoring and surveillance, when we think about One Health approach that you both mentioned, animal health, human health, connecting animal to human health, we see it as One Health approach. However, what one can observe now is a little bit underestimating environmental sector from this One Health. So, and we see now, as well as, for example, in water environment, plastic pollution, AMR, climate change is working on the environment abiotic system. And therefore, I have a question again to Dr. Anna and Lucia. How do you think can we bring environmental sector up to the policy more, and how we can also connect it through to not only a human but also animal, and bring environment to this place? Yeah, Anna, please.
Okay. As the research arm of the Department of Health, we do a lot of researches in a lot of our divisions. And then when we have the data already and the results, we can translate this into policy brief, which we endorse to the Department of Health. If we have a good outcome of the researches that we've had, we can lobby in the Philippines. We can lobby this to a particular legislator, either a congressman or a senator, to help us into the creation of a Republic Act that can be translated into a law in the future. At the moment, because of this One Health approach, we also include the Department of Energy and Natural Resources together with the Bureau of Animal Industry and the Department of Health in all our conversations, in all our meetings, and in all our plannings for the One Health strategy. So in the Philippines, it is easier for us to lobby something to the legislators if and when they also support this particular project or this particular topic. And when they will be sponsoring a Republic Act in relation to your topic or your research, this will be heard in the legislative body, and the congressman will have the readings for this particular Republic Act until it reaches the Senate. And if it goes up and be approved by the whole congressional body, then this can be endorsed to the president, and it will become a law. So when it comes into a law, the particular contents of that particular law will probably be helpful in the implementation of whatever solutions we want to have, solving climate change, problems in animal health, and as human health as well. So that's how we do it with our policymakers in our country. Thank you.
Thank you. Lucia, what do you think? Can we, on international level, can we bring the international organizations also to consider environmental sector on the same level as animal sector and human health sector?
Yeah, so I think a lot has been done since the incorporation of UNEP to the Quadripartite Alliance that happened a few years ago. So before that, it was just like plant, animal, and human health, and since then, the environmental dimensions are also considered. So I think that meant that the environmental sector has also a seat in the table, and they can bring knowledge about the environmental dimensions of antimicrobial resistance, but other health threats. Also, I think that this year is particularly important. It's a political year because there will be a United Nations General Assembly meeting in September. There will be a high-level meeting around antimicrobial resistance happening there. And there will be a resolution after this event that will be the main outcome of the meeting that for sure will establish some targets and some goals to reach in the upcoming years. So it will mark the political agenda. And I think that one of the priorities identified for this event and to be discussed there is the environmental dimensions of AMR. So I think it will be important that we use this time to advocate for this, so it could be considered as part of this resolution, and then it could be part of the political agenda for the upcoming years.
It is great, especially if you could also bring the question of microplastic associated AMR to the table. It would be great. We talked about we use the word community quite often today as the actors of change. However, I had a feeling that we use the word community talking about indigenous community, or Joachim mentioned Sri Lanka, or we have the Filipinos colleagues. But what about, we need to think about also, as you know, we are also a community here in Europe, and we are also a community, so we do not think about talking to communities only in South. We need to think about how do we talk to the communities also in the global North. And this is my question to Denise. How can we bring the communities, of course, from global South and global North together? Maybe we could learn from each other on community level, not only on policy level or international organization level, but is it possible to somehow engage in a global community to address these questions?
Yeah, so actually a very good question, because I feel like I also get the best of this both worlds, because I'm a national from the global South, but currently working in the global North. And and usually something that actually I learned from the NGO called Non-Timber Forest Products Exchange Program. So in this NGO, what they do is to actually bring communities, indigenous communities actually. And so one indigenous community from Cambodia will be going to an indigenous community in Indonesia, for example. And so you can say, okay, there is the language barrier, right? But it's the same. If we do the global North and global South, we have this language barrier. But such exchange programs could actually work. And normally what we see, right, here, a lot of programs are being sponsored by the German government on knowledge transfer, bringing the global South to Germany. But we should also be open to think that we can learn from the global South as well. And especially on these issues, right? So we already discussed earlier, also Joachim was mentioning about Sri Lanka. And this is also something that I noticed, because reading can only bring you so much learning. So if we're just in the classroom in this hall, for example, it's only up to a superficial level that we learn about things. And if we are learning on issues such as the Global South, it's important we really go there. Because at the end of the day, you know, all of these international treaties, etc., we know that the global North have a more dominant voice, because they are the ones who have the money to bring. As you mentioned, the UNFCCC, the subsidiary body is happening at the moment. I will be there actually next week. And if you're coming from the global South, you need a visa. So in order to bridge this gap, why don't we, based in the global North, go to the global South? And so that these hurdles that they already have in accessing the global North would be a little bit minimized. So this is one thing that I think could be done.
It's an interesting perspective. Yes. Very good point. Yes, I guess we have representative here of youth and young scientists and actor of change. I personally believe that younger people should be better than us, just because evolution was supposed to make them better. So, but we do not want to put any responsibility on you for our own mistakes. And but I think young people have now better capacity to go beyond intercultural barriers. You have a better understanding of importance of communication and see beyond culture, race, language, age, and so on. And what do you think, Christina? What's the role of young scientists and actors of change can be already done now? What can you do now already to address climate change, microplastic pollution, and antimicrobial resistance?
Thank you, Marina. I'm feeling a little bit the pressure of evolution here. Hopefully you're correct, and that's what we are trying to do. So I have like different examples that come in mind, but I would like to highlight that there's the youth all over the world are very organized in different processes. So for example, as Max mentioned during my introduction, we met there at COP28 in Dubai in December, and I was there as a member of Django, and we are the youth constituency for the UNFCCC. And there, at this COP, we had the very first health day, as many of you know, and we also had the first time a youth climate forum on health and human security that I had the pleasure to also co-organize and speak as well at the panel. And there, I guess the difference between maybe youth and the older generations is that we are bold, like we are not afraid to say what we really want, and we continue during COP to push for a phase out of fossil fuels. Like they have to stop, we all know that, and it would be like if there was a phase out, we wouldn't even need projects like Tulip to fix the problem, right? That didn't happen at COP, there was no phase out, only a phase down, slow transition away from fossil fuels, but we continued. So as I mentioned, as my role as the European Regional Caucus Coordinator for the major group of children and youth, we organize assemblies and sessions to ensure that the participation of youth is throughout the year, not only in major events like COP. Mm-hmm. And in Geneva in March, we participated in the Regional Forum on Sustainable Development, where member states of the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe region, which is Europe, North America, and other states, gathered to review some of the SDGs, including climate action. So we, the youth, met for 3 days. We had a regional youth assembly. We wrote our policy paper with our demands. And we are very proud that out of there's 101 clauses in the official report of the forum from the member states, and we were mentioned, youth, and our demands 37 times, including a phase out. This doesn't mean that it will be done, but it is written in the official report that will go to July to the high-level political forum on sustainable development that will be held in New York, which will be kind of the global, let's say, the global meeting. We did the regional one in March, and now there will be the global one. And our sentence of youth from the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe region demand a phase out is there, so they can take it away from us. We're saying it. So, and this is just one example. I also wanted to comment on another way to enact change, not only through policy making, but through citizen science. That is something that Tulip is very active on, and it's super exciting to hear what's going to happen in the next few years. So children and youth can be perfect participants of citizen science, because we are already enjoying some activities like scuba diving or hiking or going to the beach, where instead of just having fun, which is important, but we can also maybe pick up plastics on the way, and that's what it will be done in Tulip as well, with partners like in Oceana, who will be diving and incentivizing this, or participating with schools for workshops or university students. So I think that we want to participate, we want to help. We just need to figure out a way, and I think Tulip will really make a difference in this triple planetary health crisis issue. Yes.
It's a great. Thank you. I also experienced interesting statement from a student of mine. We talked about pandemics, and interestingly that different audiences require different communication, not only from us, but from also policymakers, as well as younger audience would like to have apparently different communication tools and so on to receive the message and to engage into the action. And this is my question to, again, to the panel and then to Christina. What, Lucia, for example, what do you think, how could you engage the younger communities as well as other communities, all ages, in the action through your communication strategies?
Sure. In particular about the youth, we have recently also launched the working group on youth engagement and AMR. So the members of the group are representatives of different youth organizations, and they were selected based on their background, but also to keep a balance across regions, across sectors, and across gender. So they are guiding the quadripartite on the efforts to engage the youth in the awareness around AMR. And they are very active, actually. They are also like promoting messages in their own social media, mobilizing their own youth networks. And they have recently launched the Youth Manifesto around this issue. So I definitely agree that we need to engage the future generations because they are the future healthcare providers, the future consumers. So they need to be part of this movement around antimicrobial resistance. And then more in general, I think that communication is sometimes not enough, that we need to work together with science and policy. We many times want to address behavior changing behaviors that are risky, but it's not enough to raise awareness. We cannot tell people to stop doing something or to do something in a different way if we don't create an enabling context that will allow for that change to happen. So here is where we need science that can bring solutions, that can bring alternatives, that can bring other ideas that we can provide to people when we ask for a behavior change. We need also policies that can provide a legal framework, that can provide how they could change these behaviors. And we need communications because we need to raise awareness, but we need the three together to work together on the same direction for behavior change to happen.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have one point by Joachim, and then we have our first question from the audience, if I saw correctly. Yeah.
It's just a short comment. I think the communications are incredibly important, and like when doing science, the communication would be paper in some obscure journal somewhere that very few people read usually. And that could be every third year and so on. And that's really not okay in terms of keeping the momentum going, right? It's like it's too infrequent and too few readers. So communication is hugely important in the translation. And communication could also use different tools. So there's this art history here, which is recycled plastics. Stephen, can you say a few words about this? And the importance of frequent communication for science to policy.
When we organized this event, so my name is Stephen, I'm pro bono consultant for Keep Nature Alive at the moment, and Marina asked me whether or not we can have something which is related to plastic, and so it was on a very short notice, but thanks to the internet, I was thinking about, okay, let's put something in the internet like art, plastic, recycling, and not too far away from Heidelberg. And it turned out that 50 minutes away in Bad Wimpfen, where it's also a famous Christmas market, there was this company, it's called Bear and Knell, and they, for more than 30 years, so they started even 30 years ago, dealing with the problem of plastic, and they took old plastic and transformed it into art, went globally in art collections and art exhibitions, and addressing the topic very early that we have to get rid of all this waste, and using this kind of artwork is one possibility to address in communication actual problems in society. And then further on, the last 2 days we had the Tulip meeting, and I exchanged with Mark from the Philippines, and we thought it would be a very nice idea to not only have a one-channel communication. So we say, oh, you should not do this and that, but the idea is, why not come together within a project? So cooperating with this company in Germany, transferring their knowledge into the Philippines and producing in the Philippines art out of plastic, and using this within the Tulip project to address those AMR problems and further around. So this is, yeah, this is how creativity within scientists and communicators can, can be a good best practice example. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Also, so important to highlight the importance of creativity to solve problems. And we have our first, or our next question coming.
So as everybody is standing up, I'm standing up as well. My name is Michael Winkler. I'm the Administrative Director of the Interdisciplinary Center for Scientific Computing. And from the perspective of my Heidelberg University, I want to also challenge my own university to establish some of the links that you are talking about. You were always talking about addressing politics. In our university, it was a long history of actually doing politics. So professors on the local and regional level were also candidates for politics positions. And I talked recently to a former chancellor of the university, and we were both kind of asking us why this, for the last 30 or so years, declined a lot. So our professors no longer are candidates for political positions, which would make it much easier to do this transfer and have an immediate impact on the local level. You were talking about northern local communities. Of course, Heidelberg city is a local community that has an influence, and even though solutions on a global level will not be solved on a local level, they can be initiated on a local level. And I think if university would again, well, in former times the idea was that these professors would influence mostly political decisions regarding money, space and time for our university, but of course also these political issues that are nowadays imminent could be influenced by professors just doing politics on this local level. And this is something that at least should be thought about. Can we, for example, in this project, influence this? On one of the lists for the current elections, there is a professor on list place 1 on one of the parties, actually on a very conservative party, which also resonates rather well, I think, with environmental changes, global change. It's also a conservative idea to preserve and to have this. So while we see the engagement of the young students in politics a lot, I think we are lacking this engagement with the more established scientists, and that is something that should be thought about.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, we'll collect one more question and then we will get back to this very intriguing. One online question. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Chanel Molopo again from South Africa. So I'm just going to take back one of the things that was mentioned about communities and working in communities. So I just wanted to find out from my own experience with working in communities in Africa. One thing that I've noticed is that, and also having researchers coming over and conducting research, sometimes there's a notion or thinking that communities in low-income countries are sort of lacking the knowledge, and the expert knowledge is coming from outside. But when, in my own experience as well, as a researcher now and interacting with researchers from the north, I'm coming to notice that we actually do have the same level of knowledge, and as a researcher working in Africa, there's also that knowledge of contextual knowledge that we have that lacks from the researchers that come from the north. But my question that I have for the work that is being done in low-income communities is that how are you engaging members of the community? Because with this, I think it's problematic to look at them as though we as researchers, even in our own context, we're going into these communities to empower them. But how are you engaging with these communities? Is it just you as researchers making decisions, or have you gone out there and engage these members of the communities? And the other thing that I want to find out is, what are you living in those communities that is sort of, or what are you doing to better those communities? Because the other thing that we've noticed is that researchers just go into communities, low-income communities, conduct research and leave. So I just wanted to know if you're doing anything different. Are you doing something different by leaving something positive in the communities? And are you also engaging community members in your research? Thank you.
Thank you so much for the question. So if you're referring to our research projects, how we engage communities there, is it correct? Or overall our own approaches?
I think that would be good. Yeah.
To Denise then the question. Denise, please.
Yeah, so it's a very good question. And so this is also something that we at Eberswalde University for Sustainable Development and a lot of other like-minded universities in Germany are pursuing, the so-called transdisciplinary approach. And so it's extending the interdisciplinary to transdisciplinary, wherein communities at the onset are already collaborators. So we try our best. So on paper, this is really nice, right? So as equal partners, but how do you do it in practice? So the transdisciplinary approach actually takes what Joachim also mentioned already in his speech earlier today, that you take the needs from the community. So the research problem that you have, that you are pursuing, is actually a need that they have already identified, that the communities have already identified, instead of the other way around. Sometimes, researchers have like a eureka moment saying that this is an interesting topic, and I think this is nice to do with an indigenous community. But that's not the transdisciplinary way, right? That you already have like a interesting research topic, and then later on thinking like, also some funders also ask for that, right? Saying like, you need a partner, and then you first start off the research problem, and then later on, yeah, I will look for a community that might be interested in this. So the transdisciplinary approach tries to do it the other way around, that the community themselves are the ones saying like, the needs are this, and this is where you can come in. Because the caveat of the exchange program that I was promoting earlier is that the so-called parachute research, that maybe we just parachute to a community, take data, and then leave. And then what's the best thing that we can give them? As Joachim was saying, like, yeah, a paper, and then that's it, right? So therefore, the transdisciplinary approach also encourages that this partnership identifies what will the communities get out of this research. Because for us, obviously, this already happened to me. An indigenous leader asked me when I was doing my master's degree, and I was doing my field work, so he asked me, so after you leave our community, you will get your master's degree. So what's in it for us? And it was difficult to answer. I could just say, yeah, I'm going to give you a copy of my thesis. And so since then, this is really like a core memory for me, and also like a North Star for every research that I do. What benefit that they will get is something that they have to say themselves, and that we should try to fulfill as researchers. And so there has to be this contract at the very beginning, because otherwise conflicts will happen later on, saying like, oh, these people with so much money coming from Germany, they're actually just using us to get data, etc. And so very, very important to keep this in mind, at least in the work that I do, so that at the end of the day, it's a win-win situation. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to say that our online community is quite active with the questions, and I have trouble to choose one. But I think one is very interesting and encourage discussion and provocation. So replacing single plastic with renewable materials like paper, packaging will need a large production of this, including a high land use change, for example, monoculture, tree planting, and so on, if we want to replace plastic with paper. Would it also be necessary to address, and how do we rather change in a consumerism as approach? Complicated question. Why don't I ask it to Joachim?
Thank you. I knew it. I knew it. No, it's a very good question. I think there will always be trade-offs, and there should be already research out there to guide a little bit where those trade-offs are in terms of packaging, removing and avoiding single use. And there should also be other solutions. I think the problem here, one of the problem here is there has been solutions before which hasn't used paper as well. So for example, so like there's many solutions. And we need to use, I think, science and economics, I assume, to find, what's a good trade-off, and maybe not only look at, so like in this project, Tulip, we look at AMR, climate change, and plastics overall, and that's quite complex in itself, because it addresses a lot of things at the same time. What we need to do when we look at those solutions, we need to actually bring together, for example, in this case, land use, biodiversity, with climate and with plastics as well, because we're not going to be able to find a good trade-off between the proportions and the solutions to this problem, looking at one on its own. And that's a challenge, but it's also a good, it's a good challenge for science. And I think in the society, communities, they would actually understand this in a sense much better. Because they have, in your daily life, you have to tackle these issues, right? And you think about it. And when it comes into science, it's sometimes siloed. And we do it separately. And then in different conferences, we talk about it. And we read each other, newspapers about other people's insights in biodiversity, or, I think we just need to bring it together and look at those trade-offs.
Thank you. I'd like to take this a step further and connect it to the very intriguing question by Michael Winkler from earlier about the role of scientists and researchers in politics. And he basically pointed out that in the past, more scientists were involved in local politics. For example, in Heidelberg, we have very rare, a very limited amount of those right now. If I think about examples of also science-famous people in politics, I can think about Uwe Schneidewind, for example, in Germany. But he kind of gave up his position at the Wuppertal Institute to become the mayor of Wuppertal. Do you think we need more scientists, more researchers to also have an active role in politics? Would you do it, Joachim, for example? Would you run for office here?
Considering the US election and the situation there, I think, yeah, maybe we need other type of people as well. So I think it's true. I don't know if I would run for election. I don't know if I'm, but yeah, who knows? In 10 years or 15 years or something.
How about you?
Well, I'm still a Filipino national, right? And politics there is personality-based. So I have to be charming, etc., if I want to win. But what's currently happening at the moment is more of I'm connected to very much to some government agencies, but mostly doing advisory work. So, for example, yeah, I mentioned, right, one time I was also on the Philippine delegation to the UNFCCC, and it's really, I think this is one way to get there. But because if we don't have, let's say, the appetite to really go to politics, but rather, continue doing the science, which we are probably good at, right, instead of being a politician, then I think this is the best way to do it, at least on an advisory capacity at the background, and connect with, not just with the politics, but also as Stefan Ziegler here is from the NGOs, also help out with NGOs.
And a question, maybe a follow-up question to this. So in the Netherlands, we just... What? Oh, I have to introduce myself. Yeah, sorry. Gert-Jan Geerling from the Daltaris Institute, one of the partners in the project, working on water. But my question is, in the Netherlands, we have just quite a change of government. And what you see in discussions, like as a role of a scientist, that science tends to be treated as just another opinion and not as science. So I was seeing, how do you experience this as well? And can you reflect on this, how you go about this?
Christine, you want to answer?
I would like just to, I was also reflecting about this earlier today, and that's why I think it's so important, the role of trusted messengers, because as you said, unfortunately, now scientists or even policymakers, people are not listening to them. Instead, maybe they are listening, for example, to the health community. Many of us here are from the public health community, and we are the most trusted profession, or even the children and youth, like as we are saying, like we supposedly don't have interest, conflict of interest, vested interest. We are really advocating and talking about what we think is our future and what we think is our livelihood and survival, basically. So that's why maybe to answer to this, I think it's important to find like who are the trusted messengers and invest on making us, for example, talk about antimicrobial resistance and the importance of finishing and completing the treatment or the safe disposal of the antibiotic, or talking about climate change that we are already doing and plastic pollution. So I think that all of us are already actually trusted messengers within our friends and family. So that would be a good way to start, like going tomorrow or next time you have a family dinner and talk about this event and what you learned and this crazy connection of climate change, AMR, and plastic pollution that maybe many of you and many of us didn't think about before we started Tulip.
May I? Yes. Yeah. I think that suggestion for scientists to run in politics is a very good one. Because instead of like requesting for support from any politician, it's going to be you who's going to do the job. However, I understand that not all scientists would have the appetite to go into politics. And I think for us, the other way that we can do it is by having good networking skills. Like we go the back door, go to the supporters of these politicians, and then lobby for whatever projects or whatever topics that we would like these politicians to support us. But I really admire scientists who will go into politics, because for me, they don't need additional support from other people. It's going to be them who's going to do what is right for the community. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
So on the one hand, of course, Germany has an example of a scientist leading the state for 16 years. I might remember that Ms. Merkel was a physicist.
Yeah.
On the other hand, then the question to the professors is, instead of going there themselves, we are always asking, what will you do with your education after you finished? And for a politics student, it might be politics. The question is, should professors now take into account that for scientist students, it should also be politics, and making education to their students, bringing education to their students that actually not by chance brings them to this road, but send some of their students who have these capabilities to these roads. And they, on top of that, they keep their networks from, for example, the natural sciences, health, and so on, to do that. Because while I think that being in a group that lobbies towards some goals, lobbying on the one hand is not very well received by some of our society,
Yes.
and on the other hand, it's invisible. While being a politician brings this visibility to science and brings back, or that's at least my hope, also some of the credibility of science is not just another opinion. I remember very well a scientist sitting in one of these German talk shows, and she was asked again, why do you suggest that, and so on. She was really annoyed and said, do you think we do that because we just want to make you angry or so? This is just the things that we present, and this is what is. Why do you think it's our job to kind of steer people up and just make them annoyed? It's just we are presenting what we think will happen in 10 years or 20 years from now. It's much more genuine if this comes from a scientist.
Yeah, I have a follow-up comment on this, actually. Hans-Peter Grossart from Leibniz IGB. Because I think the most valuable good we have as scientists is time. And we are very much limited in time, and being involved in outreach activities means time investment. Yeah. And as an active scientist, I of course also want to do science. So I am always in this conflict where to invest my time, and I usually prefer to invest it where I'm really good, yeah, in doing science. So either we create a structure which allows scientists to be also more active and in transferring their knowledge, or I also like this idea to have more retired scientists, but then we may miss some innovation probably, being involved in politics. No, I really see this as a major problem, because as scientists we are involved in a lot of activities, but we are lacking of time. And I think it's definitely good to have more scientists in the government, and I have hope, because a new Mexican president is also a scientist. So
yes,
maybe we can change the world again. Yeah.
Nice.
Thank you so much. Looking at the time, we're running out of it, not just globally with regards to the challenges that we're facing, but also for today's session. And we have something special prepared. Louise is already coming up. She has a quick survey prepared, an interactive element, to look at the takeaways of the session today, and you may introduce it now.
Hello, I'm a young researcher from the Tulip consortium, and we thought you have heard a lot about our topics. We are happy to share them with you, but we wanted to also hear from you a bit. So therefore we have created this interactive tool where you can log on now. This is a Mentimeter. You just take your phone, enter www.menti.com. This is a really easy way, and then you can enter the numbers, the number code. Oh, we see already some positive reactions. People are on. Yeah, also to the people online, you can as easily enter as the people in presence. As soon as you have registered on the website, please keep your browser open. So the questions will actualize in real time on your phone, so don't lose your browser window. And yeah, I will of course wait a bit so people have enough time to join. And I see people are still busy to come online. Yeah. Ooh, wow, 40 participants already.
Exactly.
And I will also keep the QR code open, so in any time you can still join by QR code. Okay, then I will start. So this is the most interesting question I want to ask you now. What was actually new for you today? What insights or inspirations did you have while listening to this event? I would like to invite you to just reflect with us together and come up with keywords that are related to what was new to you. First, warm welcome. So now we see a real-time actualization, One Health, policy, action, and knowledge comes up. And also very important collaboration. you can also enter the same terms to upvote your the keyword. AMR, of course, that was very central to this event. Community engagement, policy interface on One Health, interconnectedness. Yeah, we had a lot of that today. Wow. The One Health keeps up as a very upvoted comment. What do we have? Health threats. Yeah, health in general as well. Empowerment as well. Transsectional approach. Yeah, I think we really emphasize this, that the different also research communities have together to tackle this really interconnected and complex problems. The wastewater treatment is also up here on the screen now, that this is a very, very important issue in this connected crisis of microplastics, plastics, and AMR. And what else? Biofilms comes up now. Yeah, the Tulip consortium is really focusing on the biofilm formation and the interactions of plastic and AMR. This is, which really needs some further investigation. Yeah, so we have gotten overview of what people cared also about, listening to our topics. And now the other question, to end on a very more positive and actionable note, I wanted to bring up also solutions more into the center at the end. So we have here a ranking, and you can rank what solutions you feel are most important in the regard to the AMR and the plastic pollution crisis. And yeah, really all the actions are very important, but what do you think right now should be having the most emphasis? Where do you think we can do the most change? So this is the audience personal opinion. We see there's still some change in which solutions are deemed most important to you. Oh. So I will keep it a bit running still some changes. Yeah, so we now are starting with kind of information campaigns. I mean, this is kind of what this is also. And there are lots of movements that start beach cleanups and try to tackle the problem from that angle. But there's really not super much an individual can do about all these things. So it doesn't surprise me that this cleanups programs didn't manage to get to the top. But very important, the audience thinks are plastic bans. So to approach this topic from a policy level, which is very fitting to the title of this event. But the information campaigns are not to be under-considered, and the audience would like to see some advancement in wastewater treatments, and recycling programs should improve. Nature-based solutions, actually I wanted to say maybe not everyone got from this event what it really means, but in the context of AMR and plastic pollution, there's wetlands, for example, that could be such a nature-based solution that can filter AMR and plastic pollution. So yeah, there are some other innovative or not so innovative or ancient solutions to this problem. And we are also hoping for innovative interventions in the future. And yeah, thank you for making it that far into the event and for the active participation in here and also in the Q&A session. And I give the last words to Max and Marina.
Thank you, Louise.
It was great.
I would like to ask Mark to come back to us. Hey. Thank you, you all who participated, and our online participants as well, for your opinion. It seems like it's very nicely outlined next steps that need urgently to be addressed to ban the plastic. And if it's not on policy level, we hope to encourage you to do something on your individual level, household and family. We also hope that we brought some understanding how microplastic pollution, plastic and microplastic pollution are connected to the health threats to us, to animals and to ecosystem, including the spreading of antimicrobial resistance, and how we actually also connected to climate change. And would you like to say some words?
Yeah,
please.
Words. Thank you. Thank you so much. Also, when I saw the ranking just now, that kind of confirmed my personal choice of career path, because I'm a political scientist, and I thought, yes, that's the biggest lever that we have, but also the trickiest one. It's very hard and frustrating to see this, and that's why it's so important to have forums and exchanges like this one. I think this is the great start for an exciting journey. I can't wait what's yet to come. Thank you all so much for being here and for engaging, and I look forward to the discussion afterwards.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing in this consortium, and I think looking back into the discussion, there's several major call to action: community engagement, allyship, from south to south, north to south partnership, designing interventions, centering the lived experiences of the people, also incorporating arts and aesthetics into our innovations, and of course the youth engagements. These are, I think, I hope that this is not just the beginning, and we move forward and dilute the scientific silos across the disciplines. Thank you.
Many thanks, big thanks to our speakers. Could you please get up again? And thank you so much for preparing and bringing the knowledge to us. And thank you again, all our panelists here. Thank you for your participation, to our Filipino partners, to making the journey and to participating with us and exchanging all the knowledge. And to audience, again, thank you for your attention, for all your questions. Online audience, thank you for questions as well. We would like now to close our symposium. We have small presents to our panelists, and for the rest of you, we wish you a good day and hope that floods will not find you in this town. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
You too.